It's Wednesday, March 6th, right now on CNN This Morning.
Officers, and if they did that in their countries from where they came, they'd be killed instantly. They wouldn't do that.
Donald Trump dominant on Super Tuesday, pulling off a near sweep that could spell the end for Nikki Haley. President Biden hoping to drive home two key points when he delivers his State of the Union address later this week: why he's fit for a second term and why Donald Trump is not. And Nikki Haley still hanging on, but for how long after seeing her hopes all but slip away on Super Tuesday? All right, it is 5 a.m. here in Washington. That is a live look at the Lincoln Memorial on this Wednesday morning. Nikki Haley had a rough night last night. Donald Trump all but sweeping the primaries on Super Tuesday. Although I will point out, Nikki Haley did have that slightly unexpected win here in Vermont. Again, Trump with that near sweep. And it looks like the November rematch that Americans don't want is exactly what they'll get after that sweep on Super Tuesday. Trump dominating nearly every race, winning by big margins in state after state. Now closing in on the 1,215 delegates that he would need to formally secure the nomination.
But they come into our country, we're going to stop them. We're going to close our borders. We're going to have to deport a lot of people, a lot of bad people, because our countries can't live like this. Our cities are choking to death. Our states are dying. And frankly, our country is dying. And we're going to make America great again, greater than ever before.
All right, let's bring in our panel. We have Jeff Duncan, former Georgia Lieutenant Governor, Axios publisher Nick Johnston, and CNN political analyst Jackie Kucinich, also of the Boston Globe. Thank you all so much for being here this morning. It was a late night, I know, for a lot of us. Jackie, let me start with you, just kind of big picture here. And the big question, obviously, we sat down at this table right before we came on air, right? Everyone's wondering, what is Nikki Haley going to do at this point? Because this path is really set at this point for Trump.
And there's no public schedule, which doesn't really mean anything. You can always cancel campaign events.
Like Nikki Haley doesn't have a public schedule.
Exactly. And so, I mean, for all intents and purposes, we're in the general election. And you got that kind of flavor last week when you had Biden and Trump at the border and those dueling press conferences, press availabilities that they had. And so it really, what Nikki Haley does at this point, it's really for her and her supporters rather than the country writ large.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, what did you make of what we saw play out last night? And the big thing that Haley's team has been focusing on is saying, look, there is a strong sentiment against Donald Trump in the party. It ranges, anywhere from 25 to 40%, depending on the state. It's not insignificant, but it's also not really surmountable for her.
Well, one, I hope Nikki Haley stays in the race. I think it's important at this point to have a counterweight to Donald Trump and to Joe Biden. I mean, at the end of the day, there's 100 million people waking up today just absolutely shaking their heads that we're in this position. You've got a Freudian slip, 81-year-old president who people are going to be watching the State of the Union, not necessarily for the content, but just to see if he can actually deliver it. And then, of course, you've got Donald Trump and his 91 indictments and all the riffraff that's going on there. So I certainly hope that somebody stays in there. But there's literally 100 million people that just can't believe we got to where we're at today. And look, you can break down these numbers any way you want. The top line numbers are obviously impressive with these delegate wins. But there's so much heartburn spread across these parties that there's got to be something other than Donald Trump and Joe Biden in most people's minds.
Yeah. Nick, we have this new memo from the Biden campaign just off of embargo a couple minutes ago, right at the top of 5 a.m. And they focus a lot on Nikki Haley's voters in this memo, right? In terms of how they're looking ahead to the general election. I mean, they call Trump cash-strapped, beleaguered by a host of issues. They point to some of the general election polling has been tough for the Biden team in the course of the last couple of weeks. They pointed that there have been a lot of questions raised about the recent New York Times poll, but that poll did show 10% of voters are undecided. I have trouble believing that, knowing how our politics is.
Come back to the Nikki Haley voters, which is interesting. I was just scrolling through the race results this morning, and in every state, double digits were against Donald Trump. And I talked about it last time I was here, is that Donald Trump is running as an incumbent, right? He's essentially been the de facto nominee since, since he lost the last time,
right.
And still losing 10, 15, 20, 25%, 30%, losing Vermont. And so there is a huge, to the Biden campaign's point, I think a huge mass of voters in the who are voting in Republican primary. Now, whether they're Democrats playing mischief is one thing, but there's a massive amount. And like you said earlier, right, there's millions of people who are just not happy with the result.
And it's a lot of the same people in terms of demographically, right? It's people in the suburbs, it's college-educated people that are casting their vote effectively against Donald Trump. And perhaps some of these people voted for Joe Biden and just have decided to take a pass on him. Whether they come home or not to Donald Trump in November is really the
most interesting polling data is when you go into people who are in Republican primaries and how many of them say they will not vote for Donald Trump. I think it's 1 in 7 when the most recent poll. And then the question is, okay, well, where do those people go? And if Donald Trump has a floor from the last election, which he lost, it's not going higher, well, then the Biden campaign is probably very excited about that possibility.
Yeah, this group of individuals, this 30 to 40% that ranges in state to state in the Republican side, these are cemented individuals, right? Not all of them are going to disavow Donald Trump eventually, but a huge portion of them are. And that's the math problem that me and others have been talking about within the Republican Party, is there's no way to overcome the suburbs with Donald Trump as your candidate, right? With that kind of math, where there's 10, 15-ish% that are just not going to either show up or not going to vote for Donald Trump or figure out a different way to off-gas their opinion.
Jeff, where do you stand personally? I mean, when you think about this, I mean, your family was obviously so affected by what Donald Trump did, but you're also a Republican, someone who's done a lot of work and put a lot of effort into the Republican Party. I mean, I know we've seen people like Brian Kemp have electoral success in Georgia for sure, but I mean, when you think about making this decision, how do you think about it? About who to vote for?
Yeah, I'm disgusted. I mean, I voted for Nikki Haley the other day right before I came up here early in Georgia. And it's so difficult because I'm conservative. I just don't think the 2020 election's rigged. In fact, I've got kids that are more conservative than Donald Trump is, that have been Republicans longer than Donald Trump has. He has just put a spell on the Republican Party that history's not going to be kind to, but this is the moment we're living in. And instead, like as a Republican, I look at Joe Biden and say the only person that could beat him at that moment was a Democrat, right, in 2020. And he did it. It wasn't Joe Biden or a rigged election or the Chinese or the Venezuelans or whatever their excuses were. It was Donald Trump lost the race because he just wasn't a good human in those races.
Yeah. All right, guys, stay with us here. Coming up next, what President Biden must prove to voters when he delivers his State of the Union address tomorrow night. Plus, the White House issuing a warning to one of Israel's top military chiefs. And the Alabama Senate taking action to protect in vitro fertilization. We'll have it all up next. Welcome back. The Biden administration delivering a message to a top Israeli government official Tuesday, and also possibly to one of his political rivals back home. Benny Gantz is a member of the Israeli War Cabinet and a moderate rival to right-wing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A spokesman says Secretary of State Antony Blinken pushed Gantz for Israel to do more to get food and supplies into Gaza as the humanitarian crisis there deepens.
We want to see another crossing open, and it's something we're engaged with quite directly with the Israeli government, and that includes in the conversation that the Secretary had with Minister Gantz today. He was quite direct and quite frank about the seriousness of the situation on the ground.
All right, CNN's Max Foster joins us live from London. Max, good morning to you. So, sure, they had the U.S. government message for Gantz, fine. But honestly, Gantz's presence here, without the sanction of his own government, where he's meeting with the Vice President of the United States, now with the Secretary of State, there's a lot here. What is he hoping to achieve? What's really going on?
Well, his poll numbers are very high compared with Benjamin Netanyahu within Israel. He's clearly the main opposition figure for Benjamin Netanyahu, and I think it probably works for him to be seen as this leader on the global stage ahead of any, next set of elections, if and when they happen within Israel. So there's got to be some sort of political thinking there. You've got to also think that you don't just walk into Washington and get meetings with Kamala Harris. I think it's the American perspective that's interesting as well here. They are embracing him. There's something that they feel they can get from this meeting and not too concerned about upsetting Benjamin Netanyahu at home. So, as you were saying, a message for Benjamin Netanyahu as well. We are dealing with this figure, Benny Gantz, who, if America's looking at a two-state solution one day in Israel, Benny Gantz is much more He hasn't sort of supported that, but they could probably work with him more easily on that in future than they would Benjamin Netanyahu. So America getting very involved in Israeli politics here. He's not there, as you were saying, representing the Israeli government.
Yeah, you can't help but wonder what that says about the relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu and how it's faring at this very moment. And speaking of President Biden, I mean, he's going to head into the State of the Union address on Thursday night. Likely without a ceasefire agreement, even after, late last week he had teased that there would be one by Monday. I mean, they were really kind of hoping this would be something he would be able to get up there at that podium and talk about. And instead, we're talking about, trying to airlift aid into Gaza from the U.S. because the situation has gotten just so incredibly dire there. What's the view from your side of the pond in terms of the U.S. president's political problems around this at home and how it's affecting what's actually happening to the people who are suffering in Gaza?
So from the UK, you never get major criticism of the US. It is their most important international partner. But a very similar conversation happening here today. Gantz is coming to London and David Cameron is going to be meeting him. And that whole conversation is about aid. And I think it could get even more spiky because David Cameron said much stronger words around aid. He's saying that, basically Israel as an occupying power has a legal responsibility to make sure people within Gaza are fed. International law does actually say that any occupying power has a duty to ensure food and medical supplies to the population under its control to the fullest extent of the means available to it. So that's going to be really the big message he's got with Gantz today to take back to Israel. There have been aid convoys blocked by the Israelis. The Americans are having to fly in aid now. The pictures we're getting out of starvation in northern Gaza in particular are absolutely horrific. And to see Joe Biden talking about a ceasefire, not getting it, I do think it makes him look like less of a leader to the rest of the world when he stands up in front of his own Congress because he hasn't been able to push it through.
Yeah, it's a tough set of circumstances for sure, all the way around. Max Foster for us in London. Max, thank you very much, as always. I'll see you tomorrow. All right, coming up next here, no events on Nikki Haley's calendar. What does that tell us? Plus, why House Republicans are slowing down impeachment for the Homeland Security Secretary. All right, 21 minutes past the hour. Here's our morning roundup. The Alabama Senate expected to hold its final vote today to pass legislation protecting in vitro fertilization. The bill will shield IVF patients and doctors from civil and criminal charges. Sources say House Republicans have not sent articles of impeachment against DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to the Senate. They first want to know if the Senate will agree to hold a trial. And a first for collegiate sports, Dartmouth's men's basketball team just voted to unionize. Dartmouth says they're going to appeal a decision by the National Labor Relations Board to recognize the players as school employees. All right, time now for weather. The East Coast preparing for plenty of wet weather, but first, it's swamping the Southeast. Let's get straight to our weatherman, Van Dam. Derek, good morning. So, who needs an umbrella today?
Yeah, take it from me. If you're in Atlanta, you need an umbrella, but you also need to watch out for flash flooding. We actually have a flash flood warning that's in place through about 9:30 this morning. This band of rain just pivoted right around the greater Atlanta metro region. I mean, look at it just swamping the southeast. Lots of precipitation. We've got just at my house here in Atlanta, over 3 inches of rain here within the past 24 hours. So that's significant. That's enough to rapidly rise some of those rivers. That is why the National Weather Service has this flash flood warning, and that includes a population of over 1 million people. So significant. That's why we're starting off with that. But guess where that rain is going? The East Coast. And this has got a concerning trend to it, considering that this area saw widespread 2 to 3 inches of rain very recently, so a very saturated ground. Remember, this is a sandy soil across the East Coast, so it doesn't take much to flood. That's why flash flood watches have been issued for many of the major East Coast cities. Just look how much rain above average since the beginning of the year we stand. Providence, Rhode Island, nearing 5 inches above our average for this year. It's been a wet winter. We know that in New York City, very little snow, but too much rain. Look at where this precipitation is going. Again, it swamped the southeast this morning, but then it's going to move off the East Coast, and it's going to get some influence from the Gulf Stream. So we're going to take in a lot of Atlantic moisture, and that is going to just dump this in the form of heavy precipitation from New York to Boston. So the potential there for 1 to 3 inches of rain today. Look out for flash flooding. especially along that I-95 corridor. You've been warned.
All right. Our weatherman, Van Dam, Derek, thank you very much. I'll see you next hour.
All right.
Up next here, Donald Trump closer than ever to clinching the nomination with a near sweep on Super Tuesday. Plus, President Biden's plan to take on Trump. We'll tell you about the new campaign memo that's out this hour. All right, a live look at Long Beach, California. People there sleeping off their Super Tuesday hangover. We've got some interesting results in some races that aren't at the presidential level that we'll dig into in a little while. But first, good morning. Thanks for being up with us. I'm Casey Hunt. Just before 5:30 here on the East Coast. And like it or not, the 2024 election almost certainly to be a rematch of the 2020 race after Joe Biden and Donald Trump nearly pulled off sweeps on Super Tuesday. The numbers tell the story, Trump dominating nearly every state and now within a fingertip of clinching the nomination. Now, Nikki Haley did win Vermont. Her campaign's not commenting on whether she plans to stay in the race. They did release a statement that says, quote, "We're honored to have received the support of millions of Americans across the country today, including in Vermont, where Nikki became the first Republican woman to win 2 presidential primary contests. Today, in state after state, there remains a large block of Republican primary voters who are expressing deep concerns about Donald Trump. That is not the unity that our party needs for success." Trump, for his part, calling the outcome of Super Tuesday historic, but could not help bringing up the same old grievances from the 2020 election.
A tragic thing happened during the election. It was a tragedy because you wouldn't have, think of it, all of the problems that you have today, I don't think you would have had any of them. You'd only have success. And that's what's ultimately going to unify this country and unify this party.
Okay. President Biden's campaign is out with a new memo just minutes ago at the top of the hour. They called Trump a wounded, dangerous, and unpopular man. And this, quote, "We have a clear path to victory." Let's bring back our panel, Jeff Duncan, Jackie Kucinich, Nick Johnston. Nick, it's actually kind of interesting to me that we have to use the caveat language, near sweep, and that's near sweep on both sides. I mean, right. Biden actually lost in American Samoa, of all places.
I learned that this morning, that they had a primary in American Samoa.
They did, yeah. And of course, Trump lost in Vermont because on the one hand, you know, the broad storyline is this rematch is set, there's no way around it. But the underneath of it is there are a heck of a lot of people who are really unhappy.
No, the top line of this race didn't change yesterday. It didn't change a week ago. It didn't change 2 weeks ago. I think we've been on pretty much a runaway freight train heading to one result, the one result most Americans don't really want, which is a Trump-Biden rematch. And so what makes it more interesting is instead of looking at the top line numbers, looking at those bottom line or the numbers beneath those. And again, 20, 25%, 30% in some of the states. Donald Trump running as a presumed incumbent, like in charge of the party, losing a lot of voters in his primary. And then even on the Biden side, right, there was a big result in Michigan and Minnesota, 8, 9, 10% of people like voting none of the above for Joe Biden. So I think both of these candidates have problems that they need to solve. And the one thing that's been interesting with the primaries is been raising that as opposed to answering the question of who the nominees are going to be. We knew that, to be honest, probably in January.
It's in some ways, this is the shortest primary contest I've covered. Probably in my career, just because of how quickly this has come together. But Jackie, the problems for President Biden kind of in here, or I'm sorry, the problems for former President Trump contrast to me with, obviously, the polling for Joe Biden is tough, right? People are very focused on his age. They think he's too old to run. The thing that I'm still trying to wrap my head around is sort of the Biden campaign contention that, like, people don't actually believe that Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. And when they come around to accepting that that's the case, then the battle will formally be joined. It will become not just a referendum on Joe Biden, but a referendum on Donald Trump. Do we think anything in the results last night bears that out or not?
That's tough because I think it might be because they're now Nikki Haley has kind of lost the argument that most of America hasn't voted. We're now, I think, at the halfway point. And so you are seeing, you know, the Republican Party, by and large, embrace Trump again. So I don't know that that's bearing out. However, I do think that people are waking up to the fact that this is going to be a rematch, which is why you hear Joe Biden say things like, "Don't judge me," what is it, against
Don't judge me against the
Almighty.
The alternative.
The alternative.
against the
I think
alternative.
that's going to be. I mean, that's definitely going to be like a watch phrase
Right.
that you hear over and over again because they're just going to keep pointing at Trump and hope that contrast pulls him over the line.
Yeah, I mean, the argument that they're making this morning, Jeff, is that the Biden campaign, Trump is greatly underperforming with voters who will decide the election in November. They say Trump's continued to lose moderates, underperform among suburban voters. He's shown, and that showed up in Super Tuesday. I guess my question is that going to be enough? Do you think that that's convincing at this point? That if Trump has these weaknesses that we've seen through Super Tuesday, that he can't win in a general?
Well, those statements are true. They're accurate, and that, I believe, expresses the roughly 35% that we keep seeing show up state after state after state. It really is just surprising to see how consistent this heartburn meter has been for Republicans and for Democrats. It's been about 35% for Republicans. It's about 10 to 15% on the Democrat side, whether it be an uncommitted vote or some of these other folks in the Democratic primary. Look, at the end of the day, I think America needs a vision going forward, and that's really this heartburn. It's not just about the fact that, Joe Biden's issues are age-related and policy-related, and Donald Trump's issues are character-related. Nobody's got this vision going forward. Like, really, what is the solution to immigration? I mean, I think almost all Americans realize we got to do something there. We've got to have a consistent message, a national tone and tenor around the world that, we actually know what we're doing with foreign policy. What is the strategy with inflation? I think that's the part that the rational-minded folks sitting in the suburbs are going, what's going to happen here? That's the lack of leadership. And I think that's really the ultimate void here. Neither one of these folks are appearing in people's living rooms or kitchen tables as actual natural-born leaders anymore. Joe Biden had his day. It's past him. Donald Trump's never had his moment. He's always kind of been a carnival barker, but, it is what it is. He's tricked the Republicans to think he's a conservative.
I will say that underlying all of this, and we don't have this statement in that I'm going to reference here at CNN, but NBC has it on the record. There are a lot of people who seem to think that, Nick, that there is going to be some way where these two are not the nominees, right? Despite what we've seen tonight on Super Tuesday.
People and how they got to that
well,
conclusion.
Michelle Obama's camp had to put out a statement saying she's not going to run for president.
Michelle Obama's not running for president. She was not running for president the last election. She's not running the previous election.
It's almost magical thinking at this point, honestly, for those who don't want this. And yeah, the Michelle Obama thing has been this bizarre thing on the right.
Maybe the next election.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a big difference here between the world that the people wish it to be. I think Jess is really talking about that kind of new leadership, what people are hoping for, and the world as it is. Right, Joe Biden and Donald Trump are, aside from some sort of disaster happening, will be the nominees. Will be the
but you keep saying
bearers.
aside from some disaster. The rate at which I have conversations where people on both sides, Democrats, Republicans, seem to have the specter of disaster, whether it's health related or I had one Republican call it a magic cheeseburger. Like, what on earth? It's unprecedented.
I mean, barring a magic cheeseburger, then we can talk about that. But, unless that happens, I mean, these are the nominees. And I think to the point about with a real sense of leadership, the pivot to what we can talk about coming up next, the State of the Union, I think what the Biden campaign would like to do, what President Biden would like to do is now, as the State of the Union, maybe pivot that to say, look, I can be the leader, right? I'm not the carnival barker, Jeff, as you explained about Donald Trump, and sort of take that into the general election, which I think that's the fight they want, knowing that but that weakness in the Trump, the GOP electorate for Donald Trump, I think that the Biden campaign is pivoting to next.
Yeah. So one of the places where we saw Haley have particular strength last night was in Virginia, and some of our reporters were out there talking to Virginia voters about why they made their decision. We can play a little bit of what they had to say. Watch.
You're supporting me.
You do. I think she's great. Yeah, I think she's an outstanding candidate.
If it ends up being a Trump versus Biden rematch, do you know who you'd vote for?
Yeah, I'll hold my nose and vote for Biden again.
I really like her.
I like her a lot. I think she's got a good record, and I think she's got the best chance of winning in November.
She just seems real and honest and not boom, 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 boom,
That's our Elena Treen there talking to these voters. I mean, Jeff, clearly there are people out there that, that are backing Nikki Haley, and it is not a small amount to what she says, but I want to talk about her future because she clearly has a decision to make. She's not yet dropped out of this race, but it's clear that the door is, all but closed. We may, it's going to take another contest or two to get Trump over the actual finish line for delegates. If you're her, and presumably she wants a future in likely Republican politics, what do? What's the right move?
Well, first of all, I want to applaud her for her efforts and her energy, and it takes a lot to do what she's doing, and she certainly gained a lot of momentum. to take on essentially an incumbent president and to do what she's doing is encouraging. And certainly she's got a bright political future in front of her. She's well-spoken. She's got a great resume. She's been a conservative governor. I think, Ron DeSantis probably fits into this category too. I think that if you're doing a post-game analysis, you would look to see they probably should have come out harder and just championed their conservative record as a governor. They should have taken Donald Trump straight on and stopped trying to split the hair, thread the needle, whatever your analogy is. They should have just taken it right to him early in this primary process to really define themselves. I mean, Ron DeSantis at the time, he's governor of Florida. They got COVID right. The economy's growing. Nikki Haley had a super conservative track record, and the world has been on fire, and she knows the glow better than anybody. And so that, I think, is going to be some of the post-game analysis. But she's got a bright future in front of her.
Right, but I think the challenge, Jackie, is she's got to decide what to do about Trump. Right? Like, does she endorse him? Does she not? Like, how, at one point, does staying in this race kind of start working against her in terms of her future?
Well, and it seems like at this point, she may have gone too far against Trump to come back to Trump. We've seen that a little bit with Ron DeSantis, frankly. Trump's campaign.
That's personal.
Some of that is personal, but Trump's campaign has not forgiven this. You have to imagine that Trump continues to humiliate him. And it feels like Haley might be in that pocket at this point where she can't come home to the Republican Party as it is right now. What does that mean? Perhaps not. The politics are filled with people who said very nasty things on the campaign trail only to endorse that person at the end of the day. I just think
Ted Cruz.
Oh, yeah, well, right. But I just think when it comes to the loyalty that is demanded of Republicans by former President Trump and that campaign, she may have breached that.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. If I'm Nikki Haley and I'm watching a replay of Tim Scott do what he's done, that would be enough for me not to go down that road of endorsing Donald Trump. I think, in my opinion, the Republicans are going to purge themselves at some point of Donald Trump, right? He's either, if for some reason he does get elected as president, he's going to embarrass every single day he's in office. He's going to embarrass us as true conservatives. And to take that route just for a short-term sugar high of endorsing Donald Trump, I think is a mistake.
Every other person, though, has taken that short-term sugar high, right? I've learned my lesson the hard way of saying, no, I think this one has gone too far and he won't endorse. And so I don't see a way Nikki Haley doesn't in the end when this is over, but I guess that's why we have to watch it.
Yeah, I have to say, if she were to just endorse the Republican nominee right before the convention, that might split it. But
she's not going to go on stage at the Democratic convention and say, don't vote for Trump, is she?
I would be very surprised. All right, everyone sticks around. They're going to be back with us in just a moment because up next, the jungle primary that is California's Senate race, how Adam Schiff played hardball to get the November matchup he wanted. Plus, you've made it when you have your own bobblehead. 45 minutes past the hour. Here's your 2024 race roundup. Democratic Congressman Colin Allred will take on Republican Ted Cruz after winning Tuesday's Democratic Senate primary. Allred topped a crowded field of 9 Democrats to take on Cruz, who is a target. We'll see if it works this year. And Democrat Josh Stein will square off against Republican Mark Robinson in North Carolina's gubernatorial race. Robinson is a right-wing firebrand and a Holocaust denier. He does have backing from Donald Trump. And
we are so lucky to live in a democracy where we all have the right to protest.
Protesters calling for a Gaza ceasefire stepping on Democrat Adam Schiff's victory speech. The California congressman and longtime Trump nemesis won his primary for the late Senator Dianne Feinstein's seat. He'll face Republican Steve Garvey in November. Our panel is back, and Republican Steve Garvey in California. This was not a foregone conclusion because California has what's known as a jungle primary, where it's the top 2 vote finishers of any party who then face off in the general election. And the Schiff team actually spent, and his allies spent quite a bit of money attacking Garvey as too conservative. This was viewed as a way to try to boost him. In fact, I think we can show you a little bit of. So Katie Porter was running against Schiff. She's a Democrat, built a very high profile for herself. Here's kind of how she talked about what happened in the primary in her concession speech.
Because of you, we had the establishment running scared, withstanding 3-to-1 in TV spending and an onslaught of billionaires who spent millions peddling lies, and our opponent spending more to boost the Republican than promoting his own campaign.
So she's attacking Adam Schiff there, Jackie. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, we should say she's a Elizabeth Warren protege, very much to the left of Adam Schiff. But yeah, this is like the old Claire McCaskill boosting Todd Akin over the other conservative. Now, the difference is he did it over a fellow Democrat, but he clearly thinks that with Steve Garvey in the race and not Katie Porter, he has a much easier case to make and a much easier race to run than trying to run against a fellow Democrat.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you add up these numbers, the Democratic vote is considerably larger than the Republican one, although Schiff and Garvey really not that far apart in a state that's this large. Nick, was this the right move for Schiff? I mean,
of course it is.
He locked it down.
He's going to be a senator now. I mean, as opposed to, like, this is different than explaining any kind of broad national political trends. It's just a really interesting story that we'll tell in political science classes about campaign jujitsu, right? How to boost somebody that you really don't want to run against so you can crush them in a general election. I mean, it was clearly a good idea because it worked, and he's going to be a senator.
It did work. Jeff, let me talk to you a little bit about this race in North Carolina that I know you've been paying attention to, and we touched on it. Mark Robinson, this very right-wing, currently the lieutenant governor of North Carolina. Can you, explain to us where he came from, what his deal is, and what this means in terms of who actually might become governor of North Carolina?
Yeah, as I remember, we were both in the Lieutenant Governor's Association at the same time. I remember he kind of came onto the scene through a viral YouTube video talking about gun rights, and it was a very powerful message, and he was very outspoken, well-spoken, and it kind of took his trajectory into the office of Lieutenant Governor. But I think what you're watching play out in these positions and just these just hard, gut-wrenching words that come out of his mouth are just a true example of what Donald Trump has done to the Republican Party. He's taken us straight to the gutter. And he's confused us with angry and loud equals conservative, and that's just not the case. These positions that Mark Robinson's taking are not conservative positions. They're horrific positions. But
can you give us an example?
Well,
I know he's a Holocaust denier, but
well, and that's the one I was going to speak to, the Holocaust denier. I think that and some of these other ones. It's so gut wrenching to hear him go down these pathways. And look, North Carolina should be in play for Republicans. If we had a rational-minded set of candidates that were walking into North Carolina. It's a very business-friendly state. It's a very suburban state. It's also got rural areas. I think it's an opportunity zone for us. But when you run a candidate like that up on the top of the ticket, I think the math is really simple for a Democrat if you're sitting there thinking about it. I'm sure the Democrats are licking their chops and see this as an easier win than maybe they would have if they would have had a real candidate that was focused on real policies, kitchen table issues. And that's what we've gotten away from as a Republican Party. We need to focus on these policies that matter to people because at the end of the day, we've got this unstable economy. Where are we talking about as Republicans about the economy? Are we going to just talk about inflation or are we going to talk about how we navigate people forward? And what is our solution on the border? Even if you're in North Carolina, immigration's an issue. Brian Kemp puts it well. Every state is now a border state.
Yeah. Nick, we see, for candidates like Robinson in North Carolina, who are really more conservative, or, I don't even know if conservative is the right word in the case of Robinson, but they don't, Donald Trump seems to be able to win, when he's on the ballot, he has there's a separate calculation than when some of these other, they don't have the same protections, I guess, what I would say.
It'll be interesting to see how he performs versus with Donald Trump on the ballot. But what I think what Robinson is certainly an example of why we don't have Senator Walker or Senator Dr. Oz or Senator Kerry Lake right now. These are candidates that were picked by Trump in the primary elections, who were far more conservative, who may have been far more incendiary even than the general electorate at large, and went down to defeat. I'm already getting emails from Democrats from North Carolina being oh, this is perfect. This puts that state in play. We're very excited to this right now, and that's exactly, I think, what Jeff was saying about what the Trump-based candidates do to widen that field, I think, for Democrats.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't say that, Trump lost the election in 2020. He won in 2016, but he lost in 2020. So we shouldn't say that when he's on the ballot, these people do better, but certainly they didn't do very well without him in the 2022 midterms. Jackie, Nick, thank you very much. Jeff's going to stick around with us. I will see you at the top of the hour. All right, time now for sports. The Cavaliers pull off an incredible comeback to snap the Celtics' 11-game winning streak, and they did it on Kelsey Brothers bobblehead night. Andy Scholes has this morning's Bleacher Report. Andy, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Casey. Fresh off retiring from the NFL, Jason Kelsey and his brother Travis were both back home in Cleveland to celebrate their dual bobblehead night. I'm not sure how many pro football players have had a bobblehead night at an NBA game, but I'm pretty sure this is the first brothers to get one together at the same time. And Check it out. The Kelceys said they were quite impressed by the bobblehead, with Jason saying he thought looked way better than he expected. Now, the Kelceys, they got to watch a great comeback in this one. The Celtics riding an 11-game winning streak coming into this one. They built a 22-point lead with 9 minutes to go in the game, but the Cavs came storming back thanks to Dean Wade. The reserve power forward just caught fire. Wade making 5 threes in the fourth quarter, scoring 20 points, single-handedly outscoring the Celtics in the period. You see Jason all pumped up, or Travis, I should say. He also got the putback dunk here with 19 seconds left to put the Cavs up for good. They'd hold on to win 105-104, completing their biggest fourth-quarter comeback in franchise history. Wade, the unlikely hero, with a career-high 23 points.
You know, it feels good. It just feels good that my teammates had the trust in me to take those shots. And, you know, in the first half, I missed a whole bunch of shots. But, they, you know, at halftime, they're like, you shoot it every single time, no matter what. You shoot it 100 times in a row. We don't care if you miss. And just having that belief in me, you know, motivated me. I had the confidence. And luckily, they went in.
Now, our friends over at TNT got their hands on one of the Kelce brother bobbleheads. And, well, Shaq, he has some very strong hands.
He even got the little gold chain.
What? Did you break it, Shaq? Shaq said, this ain't no damn Reeboks.
Jeez, man, we can't even have nice stuff around here. You just ripped Jason Kelce off?
The Dr. Shocks. This ain't no damn Reeboks.
Oh, Shaq. Now, the Celtics, they were not the only team to blow a 22-point lead last night. The Suns were up 22 on the Nuggets before Denver came all the way back to take the lead with under a minute to go. But Kevin Durant making this clutch three with 26 seconds left to get the game to overtime, and KD would then score 8 in the extra period to help the Suns pull away to win that one, 117-107. All right, and finally, March Madness is underway, and we've had our first buzzer beater in the quarterfinals of the Atlantic Sun Tournament. Lipscomb thought they were headed to overtime after Owen McCormack sinks a deep three here to tie the game at 75 with just 4 seconds remaining, but North Alabama's KJ Johnson, he's going to take the inbound pass, sprint across the court, and puts up a left-handed floater that goes in to win the game 77-75. And get this, Johnson played 3 seasons for Lipscomb, but transferred to North Alabama before this season. Now he ends up ending Lipscomb's season. Tell you what, Casey, March Madness, there's not many things in sports that's better. I can't wait for the rest of the month.
I know, it's an absolute great time of year. And I have to say, I mean, I'm thinking about, like, how many football bobbleheads are there ever at NBA games? Like,
can't name another one.
Like, and poor Shaq, man, we're like sitting here laughing, watching him do that. I don't know. We can show that video again, but I think it's probably buried in your system. All right, Andy, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. And coming up here on CNN this morning, a near sweep on Super Tuesday for Donald Trump. How much longer before the nomination is clinched? Plus, President Biden preparing for a State of the Union address that could make or break his re-election bid. And before we go, an out-of-this-world image. I love this. NASA astronauts casting their Super Tuesday ballots from space. We'll be right back. It's Wednesday, March 6th, right now on CNN This Morning.
They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one.
Donald Trump dominant on Super Tuesday, pulling off a near sweep that could spell the end for his only real primary opponent left in the race. And President Biden hoping to drive home 2 key points when he delivers his State of the Union address, why he's fit for a second term and why Donald Trump is not. And Nikki Haley still hanging on, but for how long after seeing her hopes all but slip away on Super Tuesday? A live look at the White House right there in front of the Washington Monument. They're still not awake there. Come on, guys. It's 6 a.m. here on the East Coast. Good morning, everyone. I'm Casey Hunt. It's wonderful to have you with us. It looks like that November rematch that most Americans tell us they don't want, well, it's exactly what we're all going to get after Donald Trump's near sweep on Super Tuesday. Trump dominating nearly every race, winning by big margins in state after state, and now closing in pretty quickly on the 1,215 delegates he needs to clinch the nomination.
They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. And they tell me, the pundits and otherwise, that there's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive. This was an amazing night, an amazing day.
Nikki Haley did win her first state, Vermont, keeping Trump from running the table. But she's got no events on her calendar, and her future is uncertain. On the Democratic side, President Biden sweeping all the Super Tuesday states. He did not win in American Samoa. He's turning his focus to November. Biden's campaign out with a new memo this morning calling Trump a wounded, dangerous, and unpopular man. And this, quote, "We have a clear path to victory." Let's discuss all this and more with New York Times White House correspondent Zolan Kano-Youngs, David Polyansky, former DeSantis deputy campaign manager. We've got Bakari Sellers, CNN political commentator and former South Carolina state representative, and Jeff Duncan, the former Georgia lieutenant governor. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Bakari, you had a very late night. I'm particularly grateful to you for coming in early.
I had to be here for the American Samoa verdict.
There you go. And I hate to kind of call you out right off the top, but you did have predictions. You thought Haley was going to win Alaska, Utah, and Maine. Vermont was missing.
Yeah,
Why'd you forget about Vermont?
You know,
I would have taken your money.
She actually got destroyed in Alaska. Utah was a little bit closer. Vermont was Maine was slightly closer, but she did well in Vermont. I mean, that's what you want when you want to be the Republican nominee. Vermont and the District of
Columbia. Yeah, the queen of the swamp, quote unquote. David, thank you for this is your first tour with us here in the mornings. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Talk to me a little bit about how you see Haley's future in the context of what just happened with Donald Trump. I mean, you obviously ran against Trump when you were part of the DeSantis campaign. He handled the aftermath of his early losses in a different way than she has. What should she do next?
Well, look, the race was all but decided the night in Iowa, a very cold night. But on January 15th, the Republican nomination was won. When you allowed Donald Trump to get over 50% of Iowa caucus goers, the race concluded. And so every candidate and campaign had to make a decision at that point, not only for 24, but for their own futures going forward. What was the best pathway for them? In our case, Ron DeSantis decided to go back and serve as governor of Florida and, make decisions about his future then. If I had been advising Nikki Haley, I probably would have fought through New Hampshire, given the independent and Democrat crossover. But going home and losing by such a wide margin in her home state, that probably, as an advisor, I would have recommended that be the end. And unfortunately for her, taking so many losses last night, to Bakari's point, up and down the country, and by significant margins, in some cases 80% going to Trump, that's not recoverable, not only obviously for this cycle, but going forward, she's just not going to be the party standard bearer.
Watching kind of the results come in yesterday, I was thinking about how it seemed like Nikki Haley really never found the right sort of way or consistent message for criticizing the former president. She at times tried to make it a generational sort of argument, both talking about the age of former President Trump and President Biden, saying that she was sort of represented a new generation coming in, but not often also directly taking on the former president, really until after Iowa as well. And I think that did play into this a little bit. She, in a way, represented a bit of the old Republican Party and the old establishment. And it, yesterday, as the results were coming in, it was hard not to think about that.
Yeah. One of the things that I think kept Haley in the race longer than perhaps many would have expected was the way Donald Trump talked about her after the New Hampshire primary. So he was on better behavior from his advisor's perspective when he was on stage last night. But he also talked about her much differently on talk radio. So he clearly knows his audiences. Let's watch first what he had to say on stage last night.
We have a great Republican Party with tremendous talent, and we want to have unity, and we're going to have unity, and it's going to happen very quickly. And I've been saying lately, success will bring unity to our country.
All right, so there he said on stage, tremendous talent in the Republican Party. We want to have unity. That's going to happen. Now listen to what he had to say on the Mark Levine show. He was not terribly complimentary.
At the beginning, she was very nice, very respectful, and then she's gone crazy. And I've never seen anything like it. She's gone off the wagon. I've never seen, she got so angry. She's a bitter person. I never saw her as that.
All right. So Trump describes her as an angry, a bitter person. I do also want to just update everyone. The Haley campaign did just send out a release saying that she is going to deliver remarks in Charleston today at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Our teams are working on sorting through exactly what this announcement could be. Obviously, she had a tough night last night on Super Tuesday. Very unclear what her path forward could be. Jeff, let's talk about the Haley voters and Haley supporters. I mean, this Biden campaign memo that came out at 5 really talks about how those people represent an opportunity for the president of the United States. Where do you think these voters are going to go?
Well, look, Donald Trump's going to squander the opportunity to actually build bridges with these folks that supported Nikki Haley. What we've seen show up as an average of about 35% state to state as they've crossed up through this point in the primaries. You know, Nikki's work was important in this process. She quantified the heartburn inside the Republican Party. It just is consistent. Folks that have just don't believe, they're Republicans, they're conservative. They're like me, but they don't believe that the 2020 election was rigged. They're fiscally conservative. They're former Republicans that Donald Trump alienated throughout his last umpteen years of doing exactly what he's done. And then Democrats who used to be Republicans. That's a 35% grouping that is really quantifiable heartburn, and it's important work. You know, it's interesting to hear Donald Trump call her angry, right? Nice and sweet, or whatever his words were, first parts of the campaign, which I think was a mistake on her part. I think it was a mistake on hers and Ron DeSantis's. But when she's not angry, she was just being honest and truthful and calling out Donald Trump for what he is, and that's a liar.
Yeah, no, the weird part about this race, though, is that it's really hard to dictate or determine Nikki Haley's future because this election, even last night's shellacking, was not a referendum on Nikki Haley. I mean, the people who voted for Donald Trump were always going to vote for Donald Trump, and the people who voted for Nikki Haley are the Jeff Duncans of the world.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's unique. I believe she has a path forward in 2028 or whatever, because you know what she's also has is she raised $28 million in between January and February, and I know she didn't spend all that money.
Let me pause because we do have some breaking news here just into CNN.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Nikki Haley will announce today that she is exiting the presidential race, according to sources familiar with her plans. She plans to address supporters in Charleston at 10 a.m. Today. With us now is Kylie Atwood. She is in South Carolina and is the person who broke this news for us. Kylie, what have you learned?
Yeah, so we're learning, according to sources familiar with Nikki Haley's campaign, that she is going to announce today that she is suspending that presidential campaign. This comes after she has been running for president for more than a year, but it also comes after last night she suffered losses across the board on Super Tuesday. Her campaign saying just moments ago that she is set to deliver remarks this morning in Charleston. That is her hometown, in her home state of South Carolina, at 10 a.m. So we will watch to see that speech from her. And I do want to point out that last night we heard from the campaign spokesperson thanking the Americans who have voted for Nikki Haley, saying that there are millions of them, and also pointing out very clearly that in Nikki Haley's perspective, there is still not unity within the Republican Party, saying that there are a large block of voters, Republican primary voters, who don't stand with Donald Trump, making it quite clear in that statement that Nikki Haley is not poised, at least at the time that they sent that statement out, to endorse the former president. So we will watch to see her language surrounding that today, as this makes it very clear that Donald Trump is now set to be the nominee of the Republican Party.
Kylie, I know she didn't have an event last night around the events. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what the mood was among people you were talking to last night as they were trying to decide what to do moving forward? And I am interested in this question, too, about what she decides to do about an endorsement, if, you know, not now, perhaps later. What else do you know about kind of any timeline on something like that?
Well, listen, yesterday we weren't hearing a lot from the campaign at all. And Casey, you've covered campaigns for long enough to know that that's pretty telling. Of course, there were no public remarks that Nikki Haley had scheduled. There weren't any campaign events that she had scheduled beyond Super Tuesday events that happened in Texas on Monday. So it was clear that they were really focused in on the results last night to determine the future of her campaign. And obviously, as they tabulated everything that was coming in. It was clear enough to them that they felt that this was the moment for her to bow out, not to continue campaigning on. Now, when you talk to campaign officials, they also said that there was a sense of jubilation among the campaign last night, that they were happy warriors, that they were feeling good. I do think that Nikki Haley's campaign feels like she did what she set out to do, which, of course, not becoming the nominee is not ideal. She wanted to be the nominee of the party, but she did set out to try and make the case that there is an alternative pathway forward for the Republican Party here. She truly believes that there are principles that the Republican Party should stand for that Donald Trump does not stand for, and she made that case incredibly clearly throughout the entire course of her campaign. Just last week, she was campaigning in more than 10 states leading into Super Tuesday, even though they knew that the stakes were going to be incredibly high, that the odds were incredibly low, that she was actually going to be able to clinch the nomination. She was still out there campaigning, making sure that Americans who wanted an alternative to former President Trump had an option that they could choose in her.
All right, Kylie Atwood, thanks very much for your great reporting, for being on top of it for us this morning. Really appreciate it. Our panel's back with us. And David, let me just put this question to you. Is this the right call for her to get out right now?
It is. Look, in presidential politics, there's nothing more difficult than talking to a candidate and ending a campaign under these conditions. But it's the right decision for her. It's the right decision for the party. The bigger challenge, I think, was alluded earlier, was what does she do in regards to Donald Trump? I would be surprised if she endorsed him today. But I believe between now and our convention in Milwaukee, she will. She committed to the RNC to get on the debate stage that she would make that choice.
Yeah, although she kind of went back on that in an interview recently.
If you want to have a future in this party, fair or not on the presidential level, she's going to have to get behind the nominee. And that's another calculus her and her team are going to have to make, maybe not today, but in the weeks ahead for sure.
So what do you see here?
She's already said thus far that she couldn't bring herself to support the other leading candidate, right? That being President Biden. This is somebody who worked for President Trump, too. Sometimes I feel like that gets lost, a bit in this fast-paced election season. She is somebody who worked in his administration as well, so that's immediately what I look towards. But I think you're right. This becomes the immediate pressing question now. But I mean, somewhat one of the stories of this sort of Trump era is many Republicans coming out and criticizing him for various pivotal moments, whether when he was president or even post his presidency, and then quickly either making a trip to Mar-a-Lago or coming out and, once again pledging support for him. So this immediately becomes the question now.
Let me extinguish any burning notion that Nikki Haley will not endorse Donald Trump. I mean, that is just a fantasy world that a lot of pundits may live in, finding reasons to, pretzel themselves to say Nikki Haley will not do this. Look, she's going to do it. It's going to come at a moment where both of them can kind of stand on a stage together and say that we're unifying the party sometime.
You think Trump would let her stand on the same stage as him? I question it.
Absolutely.
You do? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you can already see the cinema behind it. I mean, it's about unifying the party. It's a good day. It's a moment everybody's going to say, oh, my God, this is terrible for Democrats because Republicans are unifying. I think the flip side of this is no longer 1984 or 88 or 92 or whenever it is that Republicans nominate the number 2 to be the standard bearer going forward. Nikki Haley is not the Republican Party number 2. She literally, and I was just reading this article. I mean, I actually, we can read these newspapers. Like, look, I was reading the Washington Post. There's a great piece in there this morning by Robin Given that says people aren't voting for Haley; they're voting for themselves. Like this isn't exactly right. This isn't some, oh my God, Nikki Haley is the next shining star. She's not going to be someone who is a bastion of anti-Trumpism, who stands for the age-old morality and fiscal responsibility that was the Republican Party of a day gone by. I just think she happened to be somebody for the moment that people could vote for themselves and not have to vote for Donald Trump in a primary.
My encouragement to Nikki Haley is...
Read the newspapers on here, guys.
That's the whole point of the newspapers. They're here to be read.
My encouragement is for Nikki Haley not to endorse Donald Trump. I believe it's a mistake. I believe it's not moving forward for the party. And what will be a short-term sugar high, and I just name a number of individuals, Kevin McCarthy, Tim Scott's moment where it's just cringeworthy at best. I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum. It's a mistake, and I believe there's a number of folks, this 35% of Republicans that didn't vote for Donald Trump in these primaries are going to be absolutely disappointed to think somebody would just want to preserve their political career and not do the right thing. Look, if we're going to turn the tide as the Republican Party, if we're going to turn the tide as a country, we've got to be more serious-minded than just petty politics or short-term wins. We've got to go figure out a way to get real solutions on the table, right? I mean, we should be focusing, we haven't even talked about the State of the Union. I mean, the whole country is going to be holding their breath, seeing if Joe Biden can even get through this speech. And here we are as Republicans just infighting. I would encourage her not to. She's done a great job. She's worked hard. She's put a great message, and she's certainly achieved a number of goals along the way.
No, I mean, I just look at your former candidate, Ron DeSantis. I mean, what's the first thing he did? I think the quote was, you rather eat the S sandwich now, you know, and he did it, and it was lukewarm at best. I mean, he's still been a thorn in Donald Trump's side. The campaign is still holding it against Ron DeSantis, but he went ahead and did it. Nikki Haley, if she's going to do anything, she's going to put her political career and self-interest first. She might have done something noble for the Republican Party during this campaign, but I believe it's back to Nikki Haley of old.
Yeah.
It's way too early for that sandwich analogy, by the way.
Look, I was thinking you're right.
It was close.
Yeah, well, look, I think the point here, and it's important to remember, with Republican primary voters, actual Republicans, even in New Hampshire, Donald Trump won them 75-25. So what Nikki Haley's done is relied on a lot of crossover Democrats and independents, whether that was in Iowa to a degree, certainly New Hampshire, but we even saw it in South Carolina and a bit yesterday. And so if she wants to have a future in the party, she has to play within the party parameters. And if she doesn't and wants to lead a movement outside of it, that's her prerogative. But it's going to be very lonely out there, both from a donor standpoint and certainly from an electoral one.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of see that in some ways she has boxed herself in. I mean, she's learned the power of, the grassroots fundraising that comes from opposing Donald Trump. She's clearly leaned into attacking him in ways that she certainly wasn't comfortable doing at the beginning. I do think if you're going to argue, hey, this is my political center, I mean, she's got a serious turn to make if she's going to endorse Trump. Let's bring in Elena Treen, who is with us here in our D.C. bureau. She covers Trump for us. Elena, good morning. Thanks so much for being here. What are you hearing from the Trump team as this news is breaking this morning that Nikki Haley is planning to exit the presidential race later on today?
Well, you can expect that they will be very happy with this news, Casey. And this is really, and I reported some of this yesterday, this was their goal for Super Tuesday. They wanted to have very much a definitive win across the board, enough so to force Nikki Haley out of the race. And that's exactly what we're seeing play out with her remarks coming at 10 a.m. later today. And I will say, for weeks now, Donald Trump and his team have been pivoting already to a general election strategy. They really felt that Nikki Haley was standing in the way of making it official that he would be the nominee. But they had already been really turning their attention to November and to taking on Joe Biden. But this will help them in a number of ways. Having Donald Trump be declared the presumptive nominee, of course, we have to see what will happen with the upcoming primaries. We knew that they were really hoping to be able to declare him the presumptive nominee next week with some of these other races that would really give him the necessary 1,215 delegates to make it so. But the whole goal for them is to be able to do that as early as possible, which they now feel they will be able to do, and really unite the Republican Party behind him. They want to be able to pull from not just the Republican holdout voters that they are looking for, but also donors. And the money part here is a huge deal. They want to be able to have the RNC officially be able to come behind Donald Trump, to use the infrastructure of the National Republican Party to boost him in a potential general election campaign.
Elena, can I ask you, we've been talking here at the table about how Haley would handle an endorsement of Trump, what her future might be in the party. From the Trump perspective, I mean, there was no love lost between these two even kind of before this primary got underway. I mean, he's sort of my understanding is, having, talked to some people about it, like he privately snubbed her around, requests to have dinner with him and some other things that were, not normally how Trump would necessarily, basically the sense signal Trump was pretty unhappy with her. How is he likely to interact with her going forward, say, if she was willing to endorse him? Or are we more likely to see him continue to attack her?
You know, it's interesting. I think, and we can look kind of at Ron DeSantis as part of this. You know, Donald Trump, for the majority of last year, had railed against Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor. A lot of that was from personal animosity against him for believing he wasn't loyal. And then once he came out and endorsed him, Donald Trump kind of laid off him. And actually, they were willing to embrace Ron DeSantis if he were to be a surrogate. Of course, that's a different case. But it's actually a little bit different with Nikki Haley from my conversations with Trump's campaign. They believe that Nikki Haley has gone too far. And we've reported this many times, that Donald Trump has been grumbling even long after his aides had told him to just focus on Joe Biden. He's been very frustrated with Nikki Haley for remaining in the race for as long as she did, and has been very frustrated with her criticism of him. They feel that she's really gone very far, not only in that criticism, but also with some of her policy. So I think it'll be harder for Donald Trump and his campaign to embrace her if she were to endorse. Of course, that's a big question, if she would even do that after what she's been saying on the trail in the last several months. So I think a relationship between them will never be what it once was. I don't think, you know, there's going to be a wholehearted embrace of Nikki Haley, regardless of whether she endorses. And the other part of this, too, I just want to bring up is that, you know, they really do not think that Nikki Haley is a part of the Trump Republican Party. And that's what a lot of this will come down to, I think, regardless of what she does with the potential endorsement. They see her as, you know, being a different part of Republicanism, a different part of conservatism, someone that does not represent the Trump ideal. So I have a very hard time believing that, you know, they'll find a strong place for her in the Trump world or in the Trump operation looking forward. But you know, we don't really know. There are times when Donald Trump has had a lot of critics in the past who have fiercely attacked him and then later on embrace him for the sake of the party, as his advisors argue. They would rather fight Democrats than fight Republicans, but we'll see what happens.
Indeed, we will. All right, Elena trained for us. Elena, thank you very much. I mean, so, Alon, I think we should just take a beat, too, to just point out, you know, what Nikki Haley has accomplished in this race. I mean, she went farther than I think a lot of people expected her to, certainly when she first got in. It was driven by debate performances early on. And she did, for as much as, you know, people have been joking about Vermont and the District of Columbia kind of already here, she is the first woman to win a Republican presidential primary contest.
No, I think that's right. I think it was mentioned earlier that even though you have Trump sort of talking about how the party is unified, clearly there was some representation here of the frustration with the former president, what he represents, and more broadly just I think there's a lot. I speak to a lot of voters, even on the Democratic side, that often talk about sort of the remainder of the status quo with these candidates as well. So I think that she represents some of that frustration as well when it comes to the age of these candidates and sort of a lack of satisfaction with them. You're right. There was also the debate performances. I mean, going up against Ramaswamy as well, and sort of some of those moments definitely benefited her. And you also saw her lean on sort of some of the experience both in state government as well as foreign policy experience. But, I mean, clearly Trump has a grip on this party right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think my question just comes back to, Bakari, her voters, right? Like, these people are showing up, even if many of them are independents, there are Democrats, right? In some states they are. In others, it's a chunk of the Republican Party. I mean, there is a sizable constituency in the United States right now that feels politically homeless, right? Conversations about third parties are more impactful this cycle than they've been in a really long time. I mean, all of the polls show that people are really unhappy with their choices. I mean, where do those people go?
So first, to push back on the frame of the question a little bit, it's a presumption that they have to go somewhere. And I don't think those
they just
voters,
stay home?
I believe that is a huge risk that we'll see in this election, and that's a greater risk for the president of the United States than the former president. And that is what they're guarding against, this apathy that means that voters, particularly voters of color, will stay home. Also push back on the presumption that there is a Nikki Haley voter. I still don't believe that to be the case. I think that you're the third of the people that you see, the overwhelming majority of those people who did not vote for Donald Trump are going to come home to the Republican Party. I mean, that is just the way politics is. The overwhelming majority are going to vote for Donald Trump in November. There are going to be some that do not. And those individuals that we look at who voted uncommitted or who voted for, what's the guy's name from Minnesota? Oh, I don't know. Didn't he run for president on the Democratic side? What's his name? Come on. We were Marianne Williamson, the other one.
Dean Phillips.
Dean Phillips.
Yes, of course.
Okay,
yes.
that one.
Sorry, it took me a second to figure out who you were referencing.
Yes, that one. that one. And Dean Phillips, those individuals who voted uncommitted for Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson, you know, the question is they're not going to vote for Donald Trump. The question is, can Joe Biden get them to come out? I mean, that's the question.
Jeff, what do you make of all this?
The back of the napkin math right now, if we're all being honest, Democrats and Republicans, is there's 100 million people in America that are unhappy with their selection. Right? If it's Joe Biden and Donald Trump, there's 100 million folks. And they're there for a number of reasons, right? If you're a Republican and you're not with Donald Trump, it's because you don't believe the 2020 election was rigged. It's because you're disgusted by the personal behavior. You're disgusted by the lack of ethics and morals and values and the family. You know, how do I explain to my teenage kids how to act and grow up when somebody who's supposed to be the head of my party acts and does and says the same things to do? Democrats have their own list of issues, and I'm sure you would wish if you could hit the reset button, you'd pick somebody younger than Joe Biden, somebody who's more polished and policy-centered. But the reality is that's where we're at. We have culture problems in our parties, and if you're a company and you have a culture problem, you don't make micro-sized changes. You change the leader. And to me, this is the tectonic shift. Nikki Haley proved that there's a culture problem inside the Republican Party, and the exact number is 35%. That creates the permanent math problem for Donald Trump in this coming election. No matter how bad Joe Biden is, Donald Trump cannot beat him.
This is what I think we're all kind of getting at, which is, did any support that Nikki Haley have represent sort of actual support for that candidate, or rather a discontent for the other two candidates?
Yeah, I mean, we asked that in exit polls, and there was a lot of discontent.
Look, even when we started the cycle, we modeled, and it was almost equal across the board in thirds. There was a third of the primary electorate across the board that was always going to be not consider Trump. They were not going to vote for Donald Trump in a primary or caucus this cycle. There was another third that was always going to support Trump. The real meat of the debate was the middle third, which was consider Trump and others. They had voted, supported him in the past, but were open to another candidate. That's where we tried to get in on the DeSantis side and battle him, and it was a really hard lane. But as the Tim Scotts of the world and others started to drop out, Nikki grew in that never consider Trump universe. So unfortunately for her, it wasn't a pro-Haley universe. It was just a universe of folks that, to the governor's point, were dissatisfied with Donald Trump, were not going to support him across the board, and she fit that model. That doesn't translate into the future very well, I don't think.
David, what would you say to, I mean, her argument here at the end on the campaign trail is that Donald Trump is a loser. And, like, that's borne out in the data that we've seen since 2020, the 2022 midterms. I mean, there are all sorts of 2 Georgia Senate races, right, that are now...
Thank you, Donald Trump.
...held by, Democrats. Like, there is obviously a head-to-head general election matchup between Trump and Biden is a different question. And you can, from Joe Biden's perspective, it's compare me to the alternative, not the almighty. I get that, but I still don't see how the Republican Party ends up being... The evidence contradicts the claim that the Republican Party can be a majority party in the U.S., with the circumstances being what they are right now.
Look, it's very hard to make an argument that Donald Trump is a loser after a night like last night. And I know that's counterintuitive.
I don't think anyone's saying that he isn't a primary, for sure, but a primary elected is very different from the country.
It is, but even if you look at the data from the New York Times polling this past weekend, I mean, 28% of Democrats are very enthusiastic about Joe Biden, 23%, 48% of Republicans are. And so if you're talking about, looking forward into November, Joe Biden's the one that has a real base problem right now. I mean, with minority voters, with men. Maybe he'll do exceedingly well in the suburbs today.
I don't know how we get that. I mean, listen, Joe Biden doesn't have a base problem. Joe Biden has a very loud minority that oppose certain policy views, particularly that in Gaza. That does not equate to Joe Biden having a base problem. The fact is, if you go back and look at last night's Super Tuesday and you compare it side by side with Barack Obama in 2012, Joe Biden outperformed him. Like, so this whole narrative, it's weird how narratives get baked into our lexicon. Joe Biden has a base problem. He doesn't. Joe Biden is old. Yes, but so is Donald Trump. I mean, we have to reframe the argument when we're talking about Joe Biden. Nobody's caring about whether or not he can complete a speech on Thursday. I heard that being said by my friend Jeff. The question is, what is he going to say?
We have to push pause because we're hitting the bottom half of the hour here, and I do want to reset on breaking news before we continue this conversation. We continue our coverage now with breaking news.
This is CNN Breaking News.
This just in to CNN, Nikki Haley expected to exit the presidential race later on this morning after she lost a sweeping loss to Donald Trump in the Super Tuesday primaries yesterday. She plans to address supporters in South Carolina at 10 a.m. We did not hear from Nikki Haley last night. She was in private behind closed doors as these results were rolling in. So this is going to be the first that we've heard from her about what she plans to do next. Let me bring my panel back in. And we were, kind of resetting this argument in terms of talking about these voters, these people that backed Nikki Haley, right, who feel like they are politically homeless in a situation where you've got Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And Bakari, you and David were, I didn't want to cut that off because he said, the Democrats have a base problem. You say that that's not true, but the numbers contradict that. I mean, the numbers, especially among black voters, are tough for President Biden.
No, they're not.
They're tougher than they were.
If you believe that 23% of black voters are going to vote for Donald Trump, I just want to go ahead and sell you that bridge in Brooklyn.
So why are they telling pollsters that they will when they...
Because, first of all, we have to begin to turn the page on polls and actually read crosstabs. And we have to begin to actually analyze how these polls, many of these polls that we're referring to are R+7 or R+8. I mean, and so when you actually look at these polls and you're looking at the voter, now, is there discontentment among black voters with what they're seeing in Washington, D.C.? The answer is yes. Is there a question or a disconnect between the policies that have been passed and whether or not they feel it in their pocket? The answer is yes. But we have to get out of this social media bubble where people run to the fact that Meek Mill is out here tweeting something about that's pro-Trump or pro-Republican talking points, or Killer Mike is out here traversing the land with Robert F. Kennedy, and all of a sudden we're saying Democrats have this base problem. That is not the case. Are there messages that need to be heeded? Yes. But we are saying that the 35% that voted against Donald Trump, that's hard and fast. Biden is putting up win after win after win without seeing that consternation that you're referring to.
Briefly, and then we're going to go to
I was just going to say, from, look, the political experts, the Democrats, people around the campaign I've talked to, it's not a matter of the black voters, going towards Trump, but what you talked about earlier, which is a risk that they could stay home. That is a real concern for those around the White House and the Democratic Party.
All right, let's bring in Kylie Atwood. She is our reporter who covers Nikki Haley. She's down in South Carolina with the latest, and she's got some new reporting for us. Kylie, what do you know?
Yeah, so as we're expecting Nikki Haley to announce that she's suspending her presidential campaign today, she's also not expected, according to sources familiar with her plans, to endorse former President Trump today. What she is going to do is make the case that he should be courting the voters who have supported her throughout the course of this campaign. Those are Republican voters, those are independent voters, those are voters that she believes he will need if he is going to win a general election. So this does not appear to mean that she will not endorse Trump at all before the November election. But what she's going to do today is really make the case that he needs to reach out to those voters. We also should expect her, Casey, to harp on the themes that we have heard from her throughout the entire course of her campaign. The need for there to be fiscal responsibility, conservative fiscal responsibility in U.S. policy, the need for there to be a certain approach to foreign policy that we haven't heard from former President Trump. So she's really teeing up what will be a conversation between her and the former president and her voters over the course of the next few months here. And we'll really just have to watch and see how that plays out, because we don't know how the former president is going to respond to that. If he's going to, play ball with her and engage with her voters, because what we have heard from him over the course of the last few months is that he doesn't want those people who are supporting.
All right, I think we may have lost her live shot. We will come back to her in just a moment. But we do have Elena Treen standing by for us. Elena, what do you hear in this new reporting Kylie has in terms of the planned Haley pitch to say, hey, you can't win a general election without my voters?
I mean, it's something that I think Donald Trump's team recognizes. They know that any sort of general election rematch with Joe Biden is going to be very close, despite what the polls have been saying. And of course, they like to tout the ones that show that Donald Trump is beating Joe Biden in a hypothetical rematch. They recognize that it would be very close and they can't take any voters for granted. And so I think obviously Nikki Haley has a point here, and I think what we saw on Super Tuesday, particularly her strength with suburban voters, is something that Trump's campaign needs to internalize and place into their upcoming strategy in some of, especially in these battleground states like Arizona, Michigan, Georgia, the ones they know that they really need to go full force ahead in the coming months to try and beat Joe Biden. But look, I also just want to point out that I think, Donald Trump very much is going to remain Donald Trump, regardless of what Nikki Haley says, regardless of what other people says. He's always had a problem with more moderate voters, more independent voters. Again, something that the Trump campaign recognizes they need to work on. But he's going to continue, using the rhetoric that turns a lot of these people off. And that's another part of this as well. His campaign knows that Donald Trump is very much a polarizing figure. And even as they've been repeatedly telling him to only focus on Joe Biden over the last couple of weeks, we saw last night when he did a radio interview, he still attacked Nikki Haley pretty fiercely. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how they move forward. And I also just want to add, Casey, in the conversations I'm having with Donald Trump's campaign right now about this, they're expecting that Trump himself will be weighing in on the announcement that Nikki Haley is exiting the race at some point. They expect he'll be the one to have the first word, potentially on Truth Social, as we've seen him do with similar announcements in the past. And we're still waiting to see whether or not they're going to be giving remarks at all, more formal remarks in relation to this news. I know that Donald Trump had wanted to hold a big event, maybe get up on stage at Mar-a-Lago again, when it seemed like he was going to be the presumptive Republican nominee. So I think those are questions that we'll be looking into today.
What do you think, Elena, the sort of, as Kylie was reporting, that there's not going to be an endorsement today, how much does that get under Trump's skin?
I think it gets under his skin a lot. I know that they want... I'll put it this way. I think a lot of the Republican rivals that he had initially who had dropped out and immediately endorsed him, you saw the way that Donald Trump reacted and embraced them. We saw, Doug Burgum, Tim Scott, a lot of his strong rivals being surrogates now for Donald Trump. I do not expect that to happen with Nikki Haley. And I think the fact that she's not going to immediately endorse, that she has these messages for Donald Trump about how he should be running his campaign, of course that's not going to sit well with him or his team. And so I think that's just going to add further to their unwillingness to want to embrace her at all looking forward. Of course, it's also unclear if Nikki Haley even wants to be embraced or associated with Donald Trump moving forward in his campaign.
All right, Elena Treen for us. Elena, thank you. We're going to go now to Arlette Saenz. She is at the White House for us to kind of check in with where the Biden campaign and the White House stand as they are taking in this news. Obviously, Arlette, Nikki Haley and her voters, again, I think this is really the important part to underscore, this group of people that, whether they were voting for Nikki Haley or they were voting against Trump and against Biden or, whatever, there are a group of people out there who are saying we don't want either Trump or Biden. And the Biden team, in this campaign memo they put out at 5 o'clock this morning, says that, hey, those are people that they can potentially get. What's the latest that you're hearing, and what's your take on this as we've watched these results unfold over the last 12 hours?
Well, Casey, Biden campaign officials I've spoken to in recent weeks have long felt that Super Tuesday would be the moment that this race crystallizes between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And the latest proof point in that argument is the fact that Nikki Haley is expected to withdraw from the presidential race today. And one thing the Biden campaign will be working on very hard in the coming months is trying to see if they can tap into those Haley voters who are turned off by Donald Trump. The senior campaign officials said as much in a memo last night as they offered their assessments of the Super Tuesday results, saying that former President Trump came out as a damaged and unpopular candidate. And Jen O'Malley Dillon and Julie Chavez Rodriguez, the two women leading the Biden campaign, wrote, quote, a significant share of moderate and Haley voters across the country are saying that Trump cannot count on their votes in a general election. And that will be key for Biden going forward, whether they can tap into those Haley voters, those moderate voters, those suburban women who do not want to see Donald Trump have a second term in the White House. The Biden campaign has long argued reproductive rights is a key vulnerability for Donald Trump, and that is something that they think will also play with moderate voters as well. And it's not just Haley voters that the Biden campaign will be going after. It's also Haley donors. I've had conversations with fundraising officials over the course of the past few months, and they have believed that there might be a universe of Haley donors that they could also tap into. But clearly the Biden campaign thinks this is going to be a very close race. There are certainly a number of challenges facing President Biden, and tomorrow he will have one of the most high-profile moments to offer his vision for a second term and try to convince voters to give him another 4 years in the White House with the State of the Union address tomorrow night.
All right, Arlette signs for us at the White House. Arlette, thank you very much for that reporting. And of course, if you are just joining us here, we have been covering this breaking news just into CNN. Nikki Haley plans to exit the presidential race, and later on this morning, she will address supporters at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time in Charleston, South Carolina. We're going to take a quick break, but we're going to have much more of this breaking news when we come back. Welcome back. We've been covering breaking news. Nikki Haley, according to sources, expected to exit the presidential race later today. Our sources also tell CNN that she will not endorse the presumptive now Republican nominee, Donald Trump. He has yet to reach the number of delegates that he would need to clinch the nomination, but without any serious rival left in the race. And after he essentially swept, with the exception of Vermont, the Super Tuesday states last night, Donald Trump in a commanding position here to become the Republican nominee. Our party, our panel is back. We're having a party, right? It's our panel's here.
Depends what's in the glass.
Breaking news party this morning. I want to show you a little bit of like Haley's sort of final critique of Donald Trump. This was her campaigning over the weekend as she was heading into Super Tuesday. And it really highlights in a pretty stark way the challenges that both Trump and, I mean, honestly, Biden also face challenges in the general election in terms of fighting over the moderate and independent voters that currently feel homeless. She put it in the context here of Donald Trump. Watch.
We lost in 2018. We lost in 2020. We lost in 2022. But look, 2 weeks ago, Republicans lost the vote on Mayorkas. They lost the vote on Israel. The RNC chair lost her job, and Donald Trump's fingerprints were on all of it. How much more losing do we have to do before we realize maybe Donald Trump is the problem?
I mean, David Polyansky, after that, how do you really go crawling back to the Donald Trump wing of the party?
Well, look, I mean, memories are short. I remember being with Senator Cruz in Cleveland at a convention speech where he didn't endorse Donald Trump, and just a few months later was one of his biggest allies and surrogates and has become so on the Hill. So politics makes strange bedfellows. You say what you need to say on the campaign trail, but ultimately, I believe Nikki Haley will endorse Donald Trump. I think she'll be part of the program to get Donald Trump elected this November. And I think if she wants to have a role and a future in the party, she's going to need to do that sooner than later, and I expect she will.
The difference, though, and I have to disabuse us of this kind of notion or talking point that the similarities between Joe Biden or the issues that Joe Biden and Donald Trump have are the same. The fundamental issues that Donald Trump has are not going to change. They're issues of character. They're issues of fitness. History is history. He lost those things. He's being branded as a loser. He's struggling with Mike Johnson to find any footwork or any stability. When you're talking about policy, this was repeal and replace Republicans. They haven't been able to replace Obamacare with absolutely anything. They have nothing but a no on immigration. And so that's the foundation of who Donald Trump is. With Joe Biden, there are things that can change. For example, if there's some semblance of a ceasefire or a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, and we believe that they're inching closer and closer to at least a period of time where there's a cessation of forces back and forth. If that happens, that changes. The economy, which we've seen him actually be strongest, Wall Street performing, the S&P, NASDAQ, all performing extremely well. If those things continue to go in the direction they're going, that is a plus in the right direction. And when on Thursday, if he's on stage and he's able to lay out a clear vision on what immigration reform actually looks like, and the Democrats are the party of immigration going forward, that's different than the problem.
I take all these points, I really do. But like I disagree. You mentioned this earlier about how you didn't think people were going to be watching the speech to watch Joe Biden's performance, President Biden's performance. And I sort of have to push back on that a little bit, because I think that this is as much about Joe Biden, the man, and kind of what people see from him, and the fundamental reality that you can't turn back the clock. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, and this is what people are telling us they're worried about.
But Joe Biden's not going to look like Tom Cruise. I mean, he's not going to go up there.
I don't think anyone expects that.
He's not going to go up there and all of a sudden become Matthew McConaughey and start, hey. I mean, he's old. That is the president.
We as Americans just want him to look like a president, act like a president, talk like the leader of the free world. And I think that's the position we're in. If I'm a Democrat, I'm sitting here going, how is the sitting president, with all those accolades that you talked about, the economy, the S&P, NASDAQ, all of those other, how are they not 20 points ahead of a guy who's got 91 charges against him, 4 separate indictments, federal, state charges? The next 7 months are going to be absolutely brutal, watching facts, figures, and evidence come out that Donald Trump lied, tried to coerce people to do awful things. I mean, we're going to watch this continue to play out. I think Nikki Haley has to continue doing what she's done. That closing argument was spot on, right? And to see her change her tune just because she wants to chase a short-term sugar high, I disagree with. I push back on that notion. I think she's done exactly what she needs to do and needs to keep doing, because if I'm skating to where the puck's going in the Republican Party, Republicans are going to get beat. Joe Biden is going to limp his way into the White House again for a second term. Republicans are going to be beat. And then what? And then what? So now we have a whole list of potential candidates that have endorsed Donald Trump and have to kind of take a shower. There's not a big enough shower to wash Donald Trump off you.
I just want to follow up on one thing when it comes to President Biden. It seems like the State of the Union as well. It is a bit twofold. You know, there were folks in the White House last year when he had that back and forth with House Republicans over Medicare and Social Security. They were watching performance. They actually thought that was a response to some of the concerns about his age, the fact that he was able to kind of move on his feet and engage in that tit for tat. It's twofold when you look at the State of the Union. One, addressing the concerns about his age, and that being how does he have another moment like that if his Republican critics do speak up in the crowd. But also, I think the greater challenge, a more pressing challenge for Democrats is he has passed a lot. A lot of people don't feel it, and a lot of people don't understand what's in those bills. So how do you articulate a cohesive, digestible message of what you have passed in these past couple years?
That's right. And look, I think with Trump, you look at what's happened on the legal front. I think as we came into this year, most people expected he would be on trial sooner. He would potentially be convicted
it was supposed
sooner.
to have started yesterday.
That's right. And in fact, there were a lot of people, both in the Republican Party and outside of it, who assumed he might even be in handcuffs by the end of this year. That's not going to happen. And number two, when you look at the issues that matter most to voters, number one, immigration. President Biden's at 18% with voters on that issue. There's nothing he's going to be able to say from the State of the Union that's going to turn that around.
There's an interesting moment, though, right now with even the immigration, because for a while, yes, you're right, it's been one of his greatest political vulnerabilities and practical vulnerabilities as well. It's a big challenge. It's intractable. But there's a moment here that you're seeing a shift in strategy. Them actually, I'm not saying, I don't know if it will be successful, but not distancing themselves from it, going on the offensive to say, the House Republicans, the Republicans in Congress are the ones that have roadblocked this. You might hear that.
But also, tomorrow. Just again, I mean, immigration is a large looming issue, right? That is an issue that Democrats have to tackle. And Joe Biden does not do well in comparison to Donald Trump on that issue when polling. But on the flip side of this, you have a major driving force that we've seen win elections in places like Ohio and Kansas, which has turned out voters and won seats and maintained seats in the Senate, and that is the issue of abortion. And you cannot, and Donald Trump's going to try to, oh my goodness, I can't use that phrase of splitting. He's going to try to thread the needle. There's a better analogy. He's going to try to thread the needle and say, although I am responsible for the reason that Dobbs is law now, I also want to make sure that women have a right to choose, and that's just not something that's going to happen. So, to articulate a counterpoint to your policy point there, yeah, immigration and crime are Achilles' heels right now, and we're trying to figure that out as Democrats are finally paying attention to those two issues. But on the issues of abortion, reproductive rights, and the economy, those are winners for Democrats right now.
Right. And you're also seeing those latter points that you made, abortion as well, you're seeing them also talk about that under the umbrella of democracy. And I'm interested to see how that resonates. Yesterday, late last night, President Biden's statement issued through the campaign definitely focused on democracy. We saw Mike Donnellan, as well as the recent New Yorker piece, say that that's kind of the way they're going to talk about these issues as you get closer to the election.
Yeah.
Watching to see if that resonates.
Jeff, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, look, at the end of the day in November, I think people are going to vote with what matters most to them and their families. That's, do they feel safe at home? Do they have the money they need to put their kids through school, pay for textbooks, pay for groceries, and take care of their families? And right now, voters are not giving Joe Biden the benefit of the doubt, even if, as we see the economy climb back.
I don't disagree with that.
And he certainly has a long way to go in battling both his base and where the most of the nation is at on immigration and crime. It is going to be a tough haul for him.
Jeff, can I ask you about January 6th and the democracy argument? Because we are seeing, I mean, this is clearly something that for President Biden is like incredibly important to him. It is a motivating, animating issue for him. And Zolan referenced this Evan Osnos piece that came out in the New Yorker where it was very clear that he and his team were very focused on that. This is not an area where you saw, I mean, Nikki Haley attacked Donald Trump vociferously at the end of her campaign in a lot of different ways. She kind of steered clear of what happened on January 6th. Why is that? And I mean, I know that you have a lot of friends, family, people you talk to all the time who are Republicans in Georgia who are not fans of Donald Trump. When you talk to them, how much does what happened on January 6th factor in? Do you think that this democracy argument is one that would resonate with them?
Starting with January 6th is probably one of the worst moments I've seen in my lifetime. In 48 years, certainly there's others, September 11th and whatnot, but it certainly was, and it was a moment in time that showed how vulnerable our democracy was. I remember Governor Kemp and I talking about it sitting in Atlanta at the Capitol, watching this play out in front of us. Just put yourself when you were at January 7th, Republican, Democrat, Independent, just put yourself where you were at January 7th. Did anybody in their right mind think Donald Trump ever had a chance to be elected to anything? Because you knew, you could tangibly feel how culpable he was for that moment in time, that moment of insanity for this country, that moment of just terminal velocity towards the wrong direction. But here we are, and I think what's happening, and I think Ron DeSantis made a misstep here. I think Nikki Haley made a misstep, then in that they didn't take the fight to Donald Trump. They didn't take the fight and just call out January 6th for what it was. Didn't call out Donald Trump for being a fake Republican, for raising the debt $8 trillion, for not actually building a border wall. He built a selfie station, but not a wall, right? He just was a fake Republican. And they didn't do that early enough, and I think that hurt the trajectory, because to your point earlier, a third never going to vote for Donald Trump, a third's always going to vote for Donald Trump. And that third in the middle was trying to look for somebody that had the substance to get across the finish line and actually have a chance to win.
The problem with the democracy argument, though, and I was talking with Terrence Woodbury yesterday, who's a pollster, and we were at a National Urban League policy forum where they were talking about the state of Black America. The problem with the democracy argument, particularly for Black and brown and young voters, is that they don't feel that argument feeling that something is broken when it's never really worked for them in the first place. And so there is somewhat of a removed sense from that democracy argument. That's why this campaign or the Biden campaign has a unique task of tying in things like capping credit card fees or insulin or student loan debt relief and all of those things that they've done, right? Showing that they've actually effectuated change. But Joe Biden, what gets him going every morning is protecting democracy. And so it's this really weird tug and pull that they're having to face.
To Jeff's point, David, I mean, do you think if you had, when you look back on the DeSantis campaign, did you miss an opening?
No. The minute Donald Trump was indicted, the race was really over. It was over in Iowa, but the minute he was indicted, he was the nominee. You saw it in every way measurable, not just from polling and crosstabs, but just as importantly on the ground. I mean, you saw a sense of momentum and energy get behind him because the former president did a very effective job of making the fight against him legally a fight against conservatives, a fight against the party, and a fight against the country. And that's a very difficult message to push back on, whether it's, on trillions of dollars in COVID spending, to not finishing the wall. There were a lot of criticisms against him. Yeah. But when you veer too closely in that lane, you also found yourself being pitted on the same side, unfortunately, as the New York Times and others who criticized him every day. And that's a tough place to be in a primary.
All right. Well, Jeff, Bakari, David, Zolan, thank you all for a great impromptu news conversation this morning, because, again, Nikki Haley, again, we expect to exit the presidential race when she speaks to supporters at 10 a.m. this morning. Don't go anywhere. Stick with CNN as we cover this unfolding breaking news.
We begin with breaking news. Nikki Haley will drop out of the presidential race this morning. A huge wave of Super Tuesday losses cementing her campaign's fate, while victories for President Biden and Donald Trump made a 2020 rematch practically a done deal.
CNN with unprecedented access, seeing firsthand China's aggressive attempts to dominate one of the world's busiest shipping waterways.
And the new legislation to protect IVF providers in Alabama could be passed today, a direct result of the Alabama Supreme Court ruling frozen embryos are children. I'm Sarah Seiden with Kate Baldwin and John Berman. This is CNN News Central. All right, the major breaking news this morning. We're standing by for Nikki Haley to officially end her presidential run, which will all but solidify a Trump-Biden rematch. And now, with Haley soon out, it is all about November and winning over her supporters. The Biden campaign now gunning for Haley's voters as they make a new push to take down the man they just called wounded, dangerous, and unpopular. Right now, Trump has over 1,000 delegates as Haley announces in hours that she is exiting the race. John Berman is in Denver. John, what are we hearing from Haley as she's about to make this announcement in just a few hours? What are we hearing for her as far as whether or not she is going to back Donald Trump? Has she said anything on those terms?
Well, look, I think that is going to be the most interesting thing, how she frames this, how she frames this day. I'm here in Denver in front of the Colorado State Capitol. Colorado is a state that both Donald Trump and President Biden won on Super Tuesday. But Super Tuesday was so yesterday. We're now in this brand new historic phase of this campaign. The first presidential rematch since Dwight Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson. The first time Donald Trump hopes to be a president to serve non-consecutive terms since Grover Cleveland. This is truly historic. And if yesterday was Super Tuesday, today is sort of Haley Wednesday. Nikki Haley dropping out of the race very shortly. And both candidates, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, who are left, trying to win over her voters. Joe Biden, much more explicitly, the Biden campaign putting out a memo even before we learned that Haley was dropping out, specifically targeting Haley voters. So everything we're about to see today and in the next few days seems to be fighting over that urgent political terrain. Let's get right to Charleston, South Carolina. Kylie Atwood is there. That is where we will hear from Nikki Haley shortly with this major announcement that doesn't just end her campaign, Kylie, but reshapes the rest of the presidential campaign.
Yeah, that's right, John. So we're expecting to hear from Nikki Haley today at 10 a.m. According to sources familiar with her plans, she is going to end her presidential campaign today. But as you guys have been talking about, those sources say that she does not plan to endorse former President Trump, at least not today. What she's going to say is that there needs to be a conversation. She is going to say that Trump needs to earn the support of her voters. And that's not altogether surprising, because we have heard from Nikki Haley over the course of the last few months saying that Trump cannot win a general election if he is losing the faction of the party that is voting for her. So she is now daring him to engage in a conversation with those voters. She has said that those voters don't want to be ignored, that they see a different vision for the future of the country. The question is, how does Trump engage with them? How does he engage with her? We'll have to watch and see how that plays out. Now, one interesting thing on this conversation conversation topic of endorsing the nominee of the Republican Party. Nikki Haley did commit to endorsing that nominee back last summer, that she had to do that in order to get on the debate stage. But she has given indications in the last week or so that she was leaning in this direction because she laid out a few reasons for why she no longer felt bound to endorse the eventual nominee, saying that the Republican Party is different now than it was when she made that commitment, and also noting that former President Trump never made that commitment, so why does she have to uphold that commitment? She is bowing out today, but she is putting herself into a position of power. It is a very deft political move for Nikki Haley, and we should note that even though she didn't get enough support to keep her campaign alive, there were some states where she had a significant faction of the voters voting for her, and so her campaign is trying to use that to their advantage today as she continues to engage in this conversation surrounding the future of the Republican Party.
Yeah. Nikki Haley, who won Vermont. Vermont, not enough to get you the nomination, but she can at least leave the race coming off some state victory last night. All right, Kylie Atwood in Charleston, please keep us posted as you hear more from the Haley campaign over the next few hours before this major announcement. Let's go to the Trump campaign now. Our Elena Treen is in Washington covering that group. And it is interesting, Elena, because while Nikki Haley's going to say that Trump needs to earn her support, he hasn't really been trying to do that at all over the last few months.
That's right. He absolutely hasn't. And I think it's interesting because, you know, unlike with some of the other former Republican rivals that Donald Trump had faced and then dropped out of the race and became surrogates, I think that's very unlikely, at least for now, to happen with Nikki Haley. Donald Trump and his campaign have long been very frustrated with Haley. They think that she was standing in the way of uniting the Republican Party behind him by remaining in the race for as long as she had. But we also know that Donald Trump had long faced Nikki Haley with skepticism. He argues that she had flip-flopped on a lot of issues. He has questions about her loyalty after she had announced that she was going to be running for president. So there's not a lot of love between the two, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. But of course, we know that anything is possible with Donald Trump. We know that people have 9 lives with him. So what is true today is not always true for the future. And I can tell you from some of my conversations with outside Republicans, including those who are loyal to Donald Trump and some of Donald Trump's allies, that some people do actually think Nikki Haley would be very effective in a future Trump administration. But again, if the election were tomorrow and say Donald Trump were to win, of course, this is just a hypothetical I'm referring to, I don't think that would happen. They are very, again, frustrated with Nikki Haley. And I think it's interesting if you actually compare this to Ron DeSantis. We know that last year, the majority of 2023, Donald Trump had really aimed most of his attacks on the Florida governor. And part of that is because he had a personal animosity for Ron DeSantis. But because of the way that DeSantis dropped out and immediately endorsed Donald Trump, he kind of laid off DeSantis, right? I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon with Nikki Haley. John?
Yeah. Elena Treen in Washington again. Elena, keep us posted what you hear from the Trump campaign, because as of now, it's the Biden campaign making a more explicit play for Nikki Haley voters amid this news that Nikki Haley is dropping out of the race shortly. Obviously, Kate, we are watching this very closely as it develops over the next several hours.
Absolutely. I mean, as you put it, John, this is the first day of the major next chapter in this presidential race. It all reforms, even though Donald Trump has won all of these races in the Republican primary with the official exit of his only competitor. The game does change. We're going to get back to John. He's in Colorado, watching all of it from there. So from the top of the ticket to critical down-ballot races, the balance of power in Congress is also on the ballot. In November, the important Senate matchups that are now coming into clearer focus this morning. We'll show you those. And Democratic Senator Bob Menendez hit with a new indictment and a dozen new criminal charges. New moves in Alabama when it comes to access to IVF treatments. Facing tons of public pressure after that state Supreme Court ruling, state lawmakers are moving fast now to take action. The breaking news this morning, sources telling CNN Nikki Haley is ending her presidential bid today. Her announcement expected around 10 a.m. Eastern. You'll be sure we will be bringing that to you. Her departure from the race comes after Donald Trump dominated the Super Tuesday contest. He won all but one of the Republican primaries last night. This morning, the new exit polling data coming in is really revealing. It's showing what Donald Trump's remake of the Republican Party looks like right now. Let's go through this right now with CNN's Harry Enton. You've been taking a look at these exit polls as they were coming in last night, as they kind of update throughout the evening.
Clicking that refresh button, right?
Exactly. Let's start with one question that we that's been asked over and over throughout for quite some time now. Republican primary voters and their take on if Joe Biden won the 2020 election. And what do these exit polls, what do these numbers show you?
I think there's no question that sort of gets at how the party has been remade in Donald Trump's image than this particular question. We all know that Donald Trump legitimately won that 2020 election. Well, GOP primary voters didn't yesterday. Take a look at the states we have exit poll data from: California, North Carolina, Virginia. The majority in each of these states said that Joe Biden did not legitimately win the 2020 election. Look at that, 57% in California, 62% in North Carolina, 50% in Virginia, which was the lowest percentage. The correct answer, 41%, still a minority there. Here's the thing to keep in mind, Kate. How did these folks vote? How did they vote come for the 2024 GOP primary? If you legitimately believe that Joe Biden won, or legitimately believe that Biden legitimately won the 2020 election, Nikki Haley won these voters by 34 points across California, North Carolina, and Virginia. But that was a minority of voters. The lion's share believed that the 2020 election was illegitimate. Look at Donald Trump's margin among this group, 88 percentage points. It was this question over and over again we've seen in the exit polls correlated so highly with support for Trump, and it worked for him in California, North Carolina, and Virginia.
Look, he's the one who pushed it from the beginning, and that's one of the reasons voters were sticking with him, and we know that's one of the ways he has reshaped the Republican Party in large part. Okay, so what do the numbers say about how Republicans feel about about Trump right now in the context of the criminal charges he's facing?
Yeah, so here's, I think, the real sort of bongo bonanzo sort of question here.
What does that mean?
It means that at 7:15 in the morning that I'm trying to come up with new phrases that...
To say crazy?
It's a little bit, maybe a little bit.
I thought we were talking about dance moves. Okay, keep going.
You know.
No, don't.
Trump fit for the presidency if convicted of a crime. Look at these numbers in Virginia, North Carolina, and California. Look at this. The majority, again, in all these states said yes. 68% in California, 65% in Virginia, 55% in Virginia, 65% in North Carolina. And I think that this really gets at the strength that Donald Trump has within the GOP, because this isn't just asking whether or not he is in fact committed a crime. It's if he was convicted of a crime, which is still, in fact, think he was fit for the presidency. And overwhelmingly in all these states, they said, yes, he was. And again, look here, how they vote in the GOP primary. Think Trump is fit for the presidency if convicted. Look at this across California, North Carolina, and Virginia. An 85-point margin for Donald Trump. If you don't think he was fit, you voted for Nikki Haley, but it was just a 47% margin. So the fact is Trump had the majority of voters on these questions, and they overwhelmingly voted for him.
This also does, one of many ways we're seeing in the exit polls that Donald Trump has some work to do to win over these people, all of these people who voted for Nikki Haley, as I inappropriately marked her face with my papers.
I think we can get rid of it. There we go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
All right, coming up, a CNN exclusive. Our reporters live on a ship in the South China Sea as a battle broke out with Chinese vessels trying to dominate the waterways there. The video next. And we're following the latest from, of course, Nikki Haley and the Donald Trump campaigns, what we're learning ahead of Haley's planned announcement and exit from the presidential race this morning. A confrontation on the high seas between China and the Philippines. Our Ivan Watson was there to witness Coast Guard vessels from each country as they clash in the disputed waters of the South China Sea. On Tuesday, the Philippines has accused China of executing dangerous maneuvers. Here's a look at what Ivan saw.
It is just after sunrise, and as you may see, there is a large Chinese Coast Guard ship directly in front of this Philippines Coast Guard vessel. And we've been watching this over the course of the last hour. These are supposed to be international waterways with free passage. I'm aboard this Philippines Coast Guard ship that was part of a convoy of 4 vessels that were headed towards a place called the Second Thomas Shoal. And before dawn, all of a sudden, these Philippine ships were swarmed by much larger and many more Chinese ships. There are more off to our port bow. These are not marked like the Chinese Coast Guard ships, but they're clearly operating with them and operating in very close proximity to this Philippines Coast Guard ship. In fact, I've seen them in the past cutting this off. And what they've succeeded in doing is not only pretty much stopping our ship in its tracks, but it has separated this ship from the other boats in the Philippines convoy, which included 2 small resupply vessels that were trying to get to the Second Thomas Shoal. Now, part of what is at play here is a territorial dispute. That shoal, the Philippines claims, is part of its economic exclusion zone. China, though it is much further geographically from this area, claims it for itself and clearly tries to stop Philippine ships from getting to it. We're completely encircled by a fleet of Chinese ships, at least 14 that I've counted. And moments ago, the Chinese Coast Guard ships were blasting a Philippines resupply vessel with water cannons. It is clearly, by swarming this ship, a show of force and a show of intimidation, and it is physically stopping vessels from another country from being able to move forward through this international waterway.
Ivan, those are incredible pictures that you were able to witness and sort of be a part of as you're watching this, what looks like real aggression on the part of China in the South China Sea. What is China saying? How are they explaining this?
Well, they're accusing the Philippines of acting illegally by going into this area that China claims for itself. They've accused the Philippines of being dishonest and of trying to stir up trouble. The Philippines is accusing China of acting illegally in this area, and a top security official today has said that if China thinks that this is going to weaken the Philippines' resolve, they're going to be really disappointed. They're going to continue trying to assert what they say are their legal rights. And a number of years ago, there was an international arbitration court that ruled in favor of the Philippines in this territorial dispute. This isn't the first time that there have been these confrontations at sea. They've happened over months in the past. One of the different things that happened here were that Filipino servicemen were lightly injured and there was some damage to some of the vessels. Also, we were among the first foreign journalists in decades to be on board one of these Philippine Coast Guard ships as it was trying to run the gauntlet past this much larger Chinese fleet. And I might add, the Philippines is a mutual defense treaty of the U.S. If things escalate, the U.S. will be beholden to come to the Philippines' defense, potentially against China, which commands the world's largest navy. Sarah?
These are really dangerous times. Thank you so much, Ivan Watson, for that exclusive reporting. Kate?
So as the 2024 presidential race now moves much closer to looking like a 2020 rematch, the Biden campaign out this morning with now its new strategy to take on Donald Trump in November. We'll be back.
New developments for you this morning on our radar. Israel is targeting a Hezbollah stronghold in southern Lebanon. The IDF released this video you're seeing behind me. It says this is in retaliation for a recent attack. Hezbollah claimed responsibility for that attack, but it said that missile launch was in response to an earlier Israeli airstrike. The Iron Dome defense system intercepted some of the missiles that had targeted Israel. This morning, Louisiana is now the 4th state in the United States to allow executions using nitrogen gas. The governor signed it into law. Before this, only lethal injection could be used. This is all happening after Alabama carried out the very first execution using nitrogen gas last month.
You want to talk about reading?
In a way only he could, RuPaul is saying sashay away to book bans by sending this rainbow school bus across the country to distribute banned books. He has an online bookstore as well. RuPaul partnered with an LGBTQ advocate and a fellow drag performer to launch the site called Allstora. They plan to promote underrepresented authors and give writers a bigger cut of the profits than other booksellers tend to do. Kate.
That is one good-looking bus. I will just say that.
Totally.
Today is a huge day for the presidential race. Super Tuesday was also a huge day for key down-ballot races. Two closely watched Senate matchups. They are now officially set for November. Each one of them in every Senate race matters. Democrats hold a slim 51-seat majority in the Senate, and they're defending 22 incumbent Democratic seats this cycle. CNN's Eva McKend is following these down-ballot races from the Senate to the House to all of the above. Eva, when we're talking about the Senate, we're talking about California and Texas. Walk us through.
You know, Kate, these down-ballot races, they are so important to the balance of power here in Washington. The California Senate primary, that was a particularly exciting one because you had 3 House members, Congressman Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, and Barbara Lee, all competing against each other. But ultimately, it was Schiff and a Republican, Steve Garvey, who are the top vote getters. And so that means they will be the ones to advance to the general election. Under California's open primary system, all candidates run on the same ballot, and then the top 2, regardless of party, move on to the general election. In a state where Democrats outnumber Republicans nearly 2-to-1, that seat heavily favored to stay blue in the fall. But Schiff could not escape, even in his victory speech last night, one of the issues that will continue to confront Democrats, and that is a deep divide in the party over how to address the war in Gaza. Let's listen.
It looks like we're going to the general, ladies and gentlemen. We are so lucky to live in a democracy where we all have the right to protest.
So you hear protesters challenging him there. Meanwhile, in Texas, another congressman was victorious, Colin Allred. He won the Democratic nomination in the state to take on Republican Senator Ted Cruz. Allred defeated State Senator Roland Gutierrez and 7 others in that crowded Democratic primary. Now, Democrats, they often suffer a lot of heartbreak in Texas. 6 years ago, then Congressman Beto O'Rourke, he shattered fundraising records, but he still failed to unseat Cruz. And we might see similar dynamics in this matchup because Cruz is also, Allred rather, is also a prolific fundraiser. Democrats face a difficult map in the Senate because the party is defending a slew of seats in states Trump is likely to win in the presidential race, including Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia. Kate.
Absolutely. These are very important races to watch. Eva, it's great to see you. Thanks for wrapping it up for us. Sarah?
All right, ahead, Donald Trump's campaign is looking for a boost in funds as he sails towards clinching the Republican nomination. He's now having conversations with the world's 2nd richest man, Elon Musk. They met over the weekend as Trump's campaign tries to keep costs low while dealing with soaring legal expenses and fundraising concerns. Also new this morning, after major Super Tuesday wins for both Trump and President Biden, the Biden campaign is making a case why the former president is, quote, wounded, dangerous, and unpopular. In a new memo, the campaign says Biden has a clear path to victory in November. CNN's Arlette Saenz is at the White House with more. What else is Biden saying in his campaign strategy?
Well, Sarah, Biden campaign officials have long felt that Super Tuesday would be the moment that this race crystallizes for voters between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. And perhaps the latest proof point in that argument is the expectation that this morning Nikki Haley will drop out of the Republican presidential primary contest. One thing that the Biden campaign will be working towards in the coming months is trying to potentially peel off some of those Haley voters who have been turned off by Trump. Not just voters, but I've told also donors that they could also target as well. Senior campaign officials spoke to that in a memo last evening as they painted the former president as damaged and unpopular. In their Super Tuesday assessments, the two women leading the campaign, Jen O'Malley Dillon and Julie Chavez Rodriguez, wrote that, quote, a significant share of moderate and Haley voters across the country are saying that Trump cannot count on their votes in a general election. And that will be key for President Biden going forward. The campaign will try to tap into those Haley voters, try to tap into moderate, suburban voters as well. The campaign really believes that the issue of reproductive rights is a huge vulnerability for the former president and one that could work to their advantage come November. And they acknowledge that they anticipate this contest will be incredibly close. It comes as polling has shown, CNN's average of the poll of polls has found that there's no clear leader in this contest. I think that average is about 48% for Trump and 46% for President Biden. Now, President Biden certainly faces a host of challenges in his own re-election bid, trying to keep the coalition that elected him in 2020 together this time around. Also trying to address some of the growing discontent within the Democratic Party over his approach to the war, the conflict in Gaza. And then there are the questions that he has faced about his age and ability to serve in a second term. But the White House and the Biden campaign clearly believe that Super Tuesday and tomorrow's State of the Union address will be key for voters as they're trying to make their arguments for a second term in office.
Arlette Saenz, thank you so much. All right, joining us right now to talk much more about this is CNN senior political commentator, former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, and the senior campaign advisor to Donald Trump's 2020 campaign, Mark Lauder. It's good to see you guys. We've just handed some new reporting from Jeff Zeleny. Let's go through this together. Nikki Haley reached the decision to suspend her presidential campaign late Tuesday, an advisor said. An advisor said that going into the big day of voting, the Haley team had set a loose threshold of winning about 40% of the vote in several states to credibly stay in the race. And the decision to get out of the race is that a benchmark for staying in, that one, a benchmark wasn't set. What do you think of that?
It makes sense. I mean, 40%, I think there was very few kind of paths for Nikki to stay in after Super Tuesday. Not necessarily because she didn't want to, but because the donor money is going to dry up. I mean, obviously, nobody wants to chase.
Sure hadn't to this point, though.
No, it hadn't. And I actually think she overperformed yesterday compared to what a lot of people thought, particularly winning Vermont. Not bad, right? But, yeah, I mean, for her, I think to go on past this didn't make much sense. 40% made sense as a threshold. I don't think there was anybody that realistically thought she'd get there. And so, yeah, it's just a two-person race now going forward.
What do you think Donald Trump is happier about this morning? How he performed across the board, or the simple fact that Nikki Haley will be exiting the race?
I think the simple fact that she's out now and no one has to talk about the primary any longer, they can shift all of the focus to the general election, which he was trying to do anyway.
He was definitely trying, but you can't.
Right. So now you can officially do it. It's over with, and you can move all of your focus to November.
What counterintuitive? Were you impressed with Donald Trump's performance last night?
No. You mean like in his speech?
Sure, either one. I was saying like how he performed in the
I mean, on the actual election results, sure, it's impressive. I hate to normalize because, after an insurrection, it's tough for me to just talk about this horse race as normal. But regardless, it was an impressive victory. He won all these states. He won big. I live in Texas now. He got like 80% in Texas. His speech was okay, I guess, if you have a low bar for him, which we do. But my issue was when he called America a third world country. Like, in what world is the inspirational leadership of a former president?
Adam, don't you remember his inaugural
countries.
speech in 2016?
Oh, I do. I was there.
Yeah.
When he called everything, he said carnage, American carnage. This is what we're going to be at again. So, yes, I also am glad the primary's over because now we can kind of go forward and talk about this. But it was an impressive political victory. I wasn't impressed.
What do you think Joe Biden should be most happy about this morning after Super Tuesday?
Well, that I guess the race is on. I mean, he now has one singular target. I think he probably knew that for a long time as well. But now, I mean, it's going to be a clear choice. And the difference is, and having worked on that 2020 campaign, the big difference is Joe Biden didn't have a record in 2020. He was hypothetical. So he could talk about ending the pandemic, not mean tweeting, and basically getting elected.
Do you think the quote-unquote distance between his record, Donald Trump's record in terms of time, do you think that helps him? I mean, like, people hoping that people have short memories?
Yeah, I mean, they remember that we didn't have the illegal immigration crisis. They remember that gas was $2.39 a gallon.
But you did have a pandemic, and you...
We did have that as well, but before the pandemic, I think we had all of these things, and that's the point that Donald Trump's going to make, and Joe Biden is going to have to try to explain away.
On that point, Congressman, the Biden campaign put out this memo this morning, Arlette was talking about it, saying after last night, they have a clear path to victory, is what the memo says, pointing to Nikki Haley's moderate voters and them saying in exit polls that Donald Trump might not be able to count on their vote. Republican voters saying Donald Trump might not be able to count on their vote come November. One big Haley donor and fundraiser was on with us last night when we were sitting there. I want to play for everyone his take on this. Listen.
Here's the struggle. Joe Biden is a cognitively impaired octogenarian whose policies I disagree with in the extreme. I think his distance he's putting between the United States and Israel now is disgraceful. I think the way he's handled Ukraine, he's just simply not doing enough. He's always a day late and a dollar short, and he hasn't been forceful enough in dealing with China. The border, of course, is a crisis. Even he now admits that. So I can't vote Democratic. So can I vote Republican? Can I vote for Donald Trump? It's tough.
Well, he says he doesn't want your support.
Then how does he win?
And how does he win? What do you think of that in terms of this now is part of the Biden strategy? They want to pull over those
yeah, so this is how a lot of us feel. I mean, I feel politically homeless, and there's no way I'll vote for Donald Trump, period. So he can't win me over. But there are a lot of people that he could. And I think that's the challenge of the Biden team right now. Look, we have been so pre-programmed in this country to default to, I have to support a party. So I either have to, and so that's where people are at right now. Joe Biden is fighting with his left. Every Gaza interruption that happens, every scream, that kind of pushes the middle away. But he has a real opportunity. He's the guy that can do it if he can make his staff allow him to be Joe Biden. If they're going to drag him to the left, he's going to have a harder time. But he has to win people like me over. He'll win me over, but people like me over to win the presidency.
Lindsey Graham was on CNN last night, Mark, and he said the path forward for Donald Trump in the general is to talk policy and contrast policy between him and Joe Biden. I think a contrast in policy is the key to getting these people, Nikki Haley voters, back on board. Do you think that's it? I mean, asked another way, do you think Donald Trump sticks with policy discussions? We know what his base reacts to. It's not necessarily on policy. It's on feeling.
Well, but I think you can do both at the same time. I mean, you can talk about low gas prices. You can talk about the immigration crisis as both an emotional reaction and a policy prescription. And I think the challenge is that, like, if you go with the exit polling last night that I've seen from CNN and others, 85 to 90% of Nikki Haley's voters were satisfied with Joe Biden's leadership. That means they were probably not Donald Trump voters to begin with, even if they did vote for Nikki Haley. Meanwhile, if you go by the New York Times Siena poll, 10% of Joe Biden's 2020 support is now have buyer's remorse and flipping back to Trump. That's why I think when we look ahead to these battleground states and the national polls, I mean, remember, I think it was 3 points that Joe Biden beat Donald Trump in 2020 nationally to eke out 45,000 vote win in 3 states. It's now a 5-point swing where Donald Trump is leading by 2 points, according to the RCP average.
We got a long general election
way to go.
ahead of us. We have now just realized this morning, this next chapter kicking off in full swing with Nikki Haley and her remarks starting at 10 a.m. It's great to see you guys. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for coming back.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
All right, Democratic Senator Bob Menendez hit with a new indictment. What's in the dozen new criminal charges? We'll be back.
This morning, charges piling up for Senator Bob Menendez. The New Jersey Democrat and his wife face a slew of new criminal charges related to an alleged years-long bribery scheme involving Egypt, Qatar, and several businessmen. In the new federal indictment, prosecutors accuse Menendez and his wife of lying to their own lawyers to cover up the alleged bribery. This comes just days after an accused co-conspirator pled guilty and agreed to cooperate in the investigation. Senator Menendez is denying any wrongdoing. CNN's Kara Scannell is joining us now live. Can you give us the significance of these new charges? There were a bunch of them before, and now they piled on more.
Right. I mean, anytime there are new charges, that is not good, right? As a defendant, you don't want to see that. He was facing 4 counts before of all conspiracy-related charges. Now they filed new obstruction of justice charges, and then also what's known as these substantive counts. So he was charged with conspiracy to commit honest services wire fraud. Now he's charged with honest services wire fraud. He's also charged with bribery, with extortion, as well as acting as a foreign agent. That was a key one for the government of Egypt. So what these new charges are, I mean, now there's a total of 16 charges that he's facing, and this new allegation of obstruction of justice, where according to the indictment, he told his attorneys who was meeting with prosecutors, so his attorney, according to the indictment, misled the prosecutors based on what Menendez told him, that these weren't bribes, but instead they were loans, and that Menendez had signed checks that were handwritten notes on them, both he and his wife, saying that it was repayment for a loan. And prosecutors say that that is not true, that Menendez had been well aware of these payments and that they were actually bribe payments and not a repayment of a loan. So he has different attorneys now, and which we saw take place but didn't really know why. Now this sheds some light on that. But, you know, he, though, remains defiant as ever. You know, he has not resigned his seat as senator, even though Democrats in, you know, his own party has been asking him to step down. He is not. He issued a news statement after these charges came out saying, "These prosecutors are trying to get me to give in simply by making wild allegations again and again without actually proving anything. I am innocent and will prove it no matter how many charges they continue to pile on." Now, he is set to go to trial in May. We'll wait to see with these new charges if that date sticks. But now they have one of these co-defendants now cooperating in the investigation. So that is another very serious and significant step in this case.
And you have to imagine that may have been used for these new charges. There is a lot to unpack there. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Kara. Kate.
Today, state lawmakers in Alabama will vote on legislation to protect IVF patients and providers. And this move is really the direct response to the backlash that the state faced when the Alabama Supreme Court threw IVF treatments really into question, ruling that frozen embryos are quote-unquote children under state law. 3 Alabama fertility clinics have since paused treatment because of the ruling. So let's get to the latest. CNN's Isabella Rosales is outside the Alabama State House with more. What are state lawmakers going to do today, and what does that mean for how quickly people could see these clinics starting back up?
Good morning, Kate. I spoke with Dr. Mamie McLean over at Alabama Fertility in Birmingham, who tells me that her clinic could restart IVF treatments as early as tomorrow or Friday. Of course, this is contingent on lawmakers being able to get this bill, this legislation across the finish line. Dr. McLean tells me that 13 days since her clinic paused IVF treatments, at least 35 frozen embryo transfers were canceled. So that right there means 35 women in that clinic alone impacted, not to mention many other women that had their IVF journey interrupted through various other stages. Then there's the University of Alabama at Birmingham, which became the first in the state to announce it was pausing IVF treatments. The school telling CNN in a statement that it plans to continue to follow the Alabama Supreme Court ruling unless one of 2 things happen, unless the court reconsiders, which typically doesn't happen, or unless a bill is signed into law. Now, it's important to mention here that the state Supreme Court ruling did not tell clinics to shut down, did not order IVF treatments to be on pause or anything like that. It just simply stated that frozen embryos are children. But as you said, Kate, it put IVF treatments into question here. Clinics like UAB, clinics like Alabama Fertility, the Center for Reproductive Medicine, saying we can't operate like that. We're in fear of legal reprisal. Very quickly here, I want to mention that the Senate and the House, they're voting today on each other's bills. If that goes through, they're going to have to reconcile the differences in the language. Once they, again, approve that sole piece of legislation, then it goes to the governor's desk for a signature. Thank you.
Isabella Rosales, thank you so much. John?
All right, yesterday was Super Tuesday. Today is Nikki Haley Wednesday. Tomorrow is State of the Union Thursday, and all three are completely melded together. Nikki Haley dropping out of the race this morning. We're standing by to watch that. Why? Because of her performance on Super Tuesday. The Biden campaign out with a memo looking ahead, targeting Nikki Haley voters, saying, quote, a significant share of moderate and Haley voters across the country are saying that Trump cannot count on their votes in a general election. Tomorrow in the State of the Union address, President Biden can try to reach out to those very voters. So how? With me this morning is Michael Waldman. He ran speech writing for former President Bill Clinton and is now the executive director of the Brennan Center. Michael, great to have you. Okay, you're writing a speech for Joe Biden. How do you reach that Nikki Haley voter?
Well, the State of the Union address, of course, is an important governmental speech, but especially in a campaign year, especially in a re-election year, it's a political speech, too. The White House is betting on the idea that there is an anti-MAGA majority in the country. So while I don't think you'll hear Donald Trump's name, I imagine they will draw lines and try to pull in those Haley voters and pull in the independents and soft Republicans who actually gave the Democrats a very strong midterm in 2022.
What do you give them? What do you talk about to reach those voters?
Well, I think a few things. I wouldn't be surprised if you hear the president saying that he wants Congress to pass the bipartisan immigration bill that Donald Trump nixed a few weeks ago. I think you'll hear him and should hear him talk about the state of American democracy. That's a theme he's talked about a lot. A lot of pundits kind of rolled their eyes, but a lot of voters really feel democracy is threatened. They remember January 6th. And so he can talk about voting rights. He can talk about the need to have the rule of law. And that's actually something that doesn't sound partisan and has wide appeal.
One of the great strategies of politics is to underpromise and overperform, set low expectations. It doesn't seem like the White House is setting low expectations for this State of the Union address. It seems as if anyone connected to the White House or the Biden campaign is acknowledging it's a big deal. So how do you measure up to those expectations?
Look, this speech, believe it or not, is in the Constitution that the president has to report on the State of the Union. It's the biggest audience by far that he's likely to get this year, unless there's a debate in the fall. But we're all going to be watching, given all the chatter about his age, to see if he has vigor and command and is sort of enjoying himself as the happy warrior. If you remember last year, he did very well jousting with heckling Republicans in the audience. And one of the things presidents always have to think about, and I'm sure they're thinking about, is Democratic presidents always get a lot of advice. Oh, don't brag about the economy. Don't act like things are going well under your watch. You have to feel people's pain. But I do think that presidents who tell an optimistic and positive story when they're running for re-election actually usually do better, and they can sometimes help shape and reshape the public sense of what's going on. I think he needs to point out where the challenges are, but not be afraid to claim credit when things are going well.
Very quickly, you brought up the age issue. How do you address that? Do you do it explicitly or some other way?
You know, I think the performance will be the main answer. He may want to try something with some humor. You know, of course, it's not an entirely sympathetic audience, so I'm sure he has to be careful. But other presidents, Ronald Reagan and others, have done it with a light touch. He cannot, however, be defensive in any way. He needs to show some positive energy and momentum.
Michael Waldman, great to get your expertise. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. The next hour of CNN News Central starts now.